You're nothing. You never were. Those were the last words Lena Hale heard before her own father had her dragged from the family mansion like garbage. The adopted daughter smiled from the doorway, victorious. The real daughter, discarded, broken, erased. They thought she'd beg. They thought she'd crawl back. They were catastrophically wrong. What happened next shattered an empire and left a family drowning in regret they'd never escape. This is the story of the girl they threw away, and the woman who became untouchable. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story reaches. The rain hammered against the windows of Hale Manor like accusations, each drop a reminder of the storm brewing inside. Lena Hale stood in the center of the grand living room, her thin frame trembling, not from cold, but from the weight of 20 pairs of eyes burning into her with pure contempt. She was 19 years old, and she was being destroyed. "You've brought nothing but shame to this family since the day you walked through those doors," her father, Richard Hale, declared from his leather armchair, his face purple with rage. His finger jabbed toward her like a weapon. "Nothing but chaos, destruction, and embarrassment." Lena's hands twisted together at her waist. Her voice came out small, broken. "Father, I didn't Don't call me that," Richard roared, slamming his fist on the mahogany side table. The crystal decanter jumped, whiskey sloshing. "You lost that right the moment you tried to destroy this family." Around the room, the rest of the Hale family watched with expressions ranging from disgust to smug satisfaction. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all of them dressed in designer clothes, all of them united in their hatred of her. They'd made their choice long ago about which daughter deserved their love, and it wasn't Lena. "Daddy, please," came a soft, trembling voice from the corner. Mira Hale stepped forward, her designer dress perfect, her makeup highlighting tears that rolled down her porcelain cheeks with practiced precision. "Don't be too harsh on sister. I'm sure she didn't mean to steal from grandmother's account. Maybe she was just confused?" The words were honey-sweet poison. Lena's head snapped up, eyes wide with betrayal. "I didn't steal anything. Mira, tell them the truth. You know I would never." "Oh, Lena." Mira's voice dripped with false sympathy as she dabbed at her tears with a silk handkerchief. "The bank statements don't lie. Your account number, your transactions. The investigators found everything." She turned to Richard, her voice breaking beautifully. "I tried to protect her. I deleted the first evidence I found, hoping it was a mistake, but there was just so much." "You lying—" Lena started forward, but two of her cousins grabbed her arms, yanking her back roughly. "Enough!" Richard stood, his 6-foot frame suddenly towering, imposing. 25 years of building an empire had made him hard, unforgiving. "I will not tolerate this disrespect in my house. You steal from your own grandmother, drain $50,000 for your selfish wants, and then dare to attack your sister. The girl who's done nothing but try to help you fit in?" "I didn't take that money," Lena's voice cracked, desperation bleeding through. "Please, just look at the accounts again. Someone's setting me up. The transactions aren't mine." Her Aunt Melissa laughed, a cruel tinkling sound. "Oh, sweetie, of course they're yours. Who else would be desperate enough? You came from nothing, remember? Raised in that disgusting countryside like an animal while our precious Mira grew up here, cultured and refined. Did you really think you belonged?" The words hit like physical blows. Lena had heard variations of this for the 2 years since she'd been returned to the family, 2 years since they'd discovered the hospital mix-up, that the daughter they'd raised with love and wealth wasn't their biological child, and that their real daughter had been living in poverty in a rural village 300 miles away. She'd been 17 when they found her, working 3 jobs, sleeping in a room with a leaking roof, wearing clothes she'd mended herself a dozen times. When the DNA results came back positive, she'd thought her nightmare was over. She'd been so stupidly, crushingly wrong. "The countryside made you rough, ungrateful," her Uncle Thomas added, swirling his wine. "No class, no education. No, you can dress her up, Richard, but you can't make her one of us." "I tried," Richard said heavily, and for a moment, just a flash, Lena thought she saw genuine pain cross his face. "I tried so hard to accept you, Lena. You're my blood, but you've done nothing but cause problems since you arrived. The incident at Mira's birthday party, that wasn't my fault. Someone pushed—" The scandal at the charity gala when you wore that inappropriate dress. Mira told me it was the right one. And now this. Stealing from your own grandmother while she's in the hospital recovering from surgery. Richard's voice dropped to something dangerous. That woman raised me. She loved you despite everything, and you stole from her. I didn't do it. Each word came out with desperate emphasis, but Lena could see the truth in their eyes. They'd already decided. The trial was over before it began. Grandmother Margaret spoke for the first time, her voice weak from her hospital bed that had been brought into the living room for this occasion. At 83, she was the family matriarch, and her word was law. The evidence is clear, child. My accountant found the discrepancies. Your name is on everything. Grandmother, please. Lena tried to move toward the elderly woman who'd once smiled at her with cautious warmth, but the cousins held her firm. I'm disappointed, Margaret continued, and those words hurt more than the screaming. I wanted to give you a chance. I really did. But perhaps blood isn't everything. Perhaps character is shaped by how you're raised, and you, my dear, you weren't raised to be a Hale. Mira made a small sound of distress, pressing her hand to her heart. Grandmother, don't say such things. I still believe Lena can change. She's just lost, confused. Maybe if we give her another chance. No. Richard's voice was final. No more chances. I've given you 2 years, Lena. 2 years of opportunities you've squandered. 2 years of embarrassments and disasters. This family has suffered enough. The room fell silent except for the rain and Mira's delicate sniffling. Lena felt something crack inside her chest, something that had been barely holding together since she'd arrived at this mansion, and realized her family saw her as an intruder rather than a lost daughter finally come home. You're just going to believe her? Lena's voice came out hollow now, the fight draining away. Just like that? You won't even investigate? Won't even consider that maybe, just maybe, I'm telling the truth? Her mother, Victoria Hale, spoke for the first time from her position on the velvet settee. The woman who'd given birth to her, who should have protected her, looked at Lena with nothing but cold disdain. Darling, you've lied so many times before. Remember the incident with Mira's college acceptance letter? You claimed someone sabotaged it, but it was clearly you, jealous of her success. That's not what happened. And the family investment meeting where you accidentally spilled coffee all over the Japanese investors' presentation? Victoria continued, examining her manicured nails. Or when Mira's beloved cat disappeared and was found locked in the cellar, where only you had been that day? Each accusation piled onto Lena's shoulders like stones, and she realized with horrible clarity they'd been building this case against her for months, maybe years. Every incident, every mishap, they'd blamed her, and she'd been too desperate for their love to see the pattern. Mira did those things, Lena whispered, but even she could hear how weak it sounded. She's been framing me since I got here. She wants me gone. Mira's face crumpled in perfectly orchestrated hurt. Why would you say such terrible things about me? I've only ever tried to help you. She turned to Victoria, tears streaming. Mother, I can't. This is too much. She hates me so much just because you loved me when she wasn't here. But that wasn't my fault. I didn't ask to be switched at birth. Victoria immediately went to Mira, wrapping her arms around the sobbing girl. Shh, darling. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault. The image was perfect. The elegant mother comforting her heartbroken daughter, while the shameful biological child stood alone, accused and condemned. Lena's father pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. I've had these prepared for 3 days, since the accountant first brought the evidence to me. I wanted to believe you'd confess, show some remorse. You didn't. He threw the envelope at Lena's feet. That's a severance agreement. Sign it, and you'll receive $50,000, the exact amount you stole, to start your life somewhere else. Refuse, and I'll have you prosecuted for theft. You'll go to prison, and you'll have nothing when you get out. The room spun. Lena stared at the envelope like it was a snake. You're disowning me? You disowned yourself the moment you chose theft over family, Richard said coldly. I didn't steal anything. The words ripped from Lena's throat, raw and desperate. I'm your daughter, your actual daughter. The DNA proved it. Doesn't that mean anything? DNA is just biology, Aunt Melissa said dismissively. It doesn't make you family. Family is loyalty, breeding, character, things you clearly lack. Uncle Thomas nodded. Mira may not be our blood, but she's more of a Hale than you'll ever be. She was raised with our values, our education, our culture. You? You're just a country bumpkin who got lucky with genetics. The cousins laughed, actual laughter at her pain. Lena looked around the room desperately, searching for one person, just one, who might defend her. Her younger brother Lucas avoided her eyes, staring at his phone. Her grandmother had closed her eyes, either in sleep or dismissal. Her mother clung to Mira like the girl might disappear if she let go. And her father looked at her with nothing but exhausted disgust. You have 1 hour to pack your things, Richard announced. Take only what you brought with you. The clothes we bought for you stay here. They're Hale property, purchased with Hale money. You'll sign the documents, take the money, and you'll never contact this family again. If you do, I'll prosecute. Am I clear? Crystal. The word came out bitter, broken. Good. Richard turned away, the conversation over in his mind. Someone escort her to her room. Make sure she doesn't steal anything else on the way out. The cousins dragged Lena toward the stairs, her feet barely touching the marble floor. Behind her, she could hear Mira's soft voice. Daddy, are you sure this is the right thing? She's still family. And Richard's response, You're our family, sweetheart. You always have been. Lena was just a mistake we're correcting. The room they'd given her had never felt like home. It was beautiful. Of course it was. Everything in Hale Manor was beautiful, but it was decorated like a hotel room. Neutral colors, expensive furniture, zero personality. In 2 years, they'd never let her personalize it. Wait until you've proven yourself, her mother had said. Wait until you've earned it. She'd never earned anything in their eyes. Now, with her cousins Marcus and Jennifer watching from the doorway like prison guards, Lena pulled out the battered duffel bag she'd arrived with. The same one she'd carried from the countryside, stuffed with everything she'd owned in the world. It hadn't been much then. It wasn't much now. The designer clothes stayed in the closet. Hale property, her father had said. The jewelry they'd given her for appearances at family events returned to the velvet boxes. The laptop she'd been allowed to use for online classes left on the desk. She packed the threadbare jeans she'd hidden in the back of her closet, too ashamed to throw them away, but too sentimental to forget where she'd come from. The 3 books she'd managed to buy with money earned from tutoring the neighbors' kids in secret. The photograph of her adoptive grandmother from the countryside. The woman who'd raised her with nothing but love and died 6 months before Lena was found. That grandmother had been poor, uneducated, rough around the edges. But she'd never looked at Lena with disgust. She'd never made Lena feel like she had to earn love. Pathetic, Jennifer muttered, watching Lena pack. You really are taking garbage. Marcus snorted. What did you expect? Country trash takes country trash. Lena said nothing. She'd learned that defending herself only made things worse. 20 minutes later, her entire life fit into one duffel bag. She was led back downstairs to Richard's study, where the documents waited. The lawyer, a thin man with dead eyes who'd known Lena was innocent and didn't care, pointed to the signature lines. This agreement states that you relinquish all claims to the Hale family name, inheritance, and assets. You agree never to publicly claim relation to the family or seek any form of contact. In exchange, you receive a one-time payment of $50,000. Sign here, here, and here. Lena's hand shook as she picked up the pen. If I don't sign, then Mr. Hale presses charges for theft and fraud. You'll be arrested within the hour. The lawyer's voice was bored. He'd done this before, maybe not this exact scenario, but close enough. Rich families discarding inconvenient members. The pen felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Behind her, she could hear Mira crying softly. Daddy, maybe we should give her more time to think. She's had enough time, Richard interrupted. Sign it, Lena, or don't. Either way, you're leaving this house tonight. Lena signed. The scratching of pen on paper sounded like the door to her old life slamming shut. Excellent. The lawyer collected the documents briskly. The money will be transferred to the account you listed. You should have access within 24 hours. The account she'd listed. The one secret thing she'd kept from this family. A small checking account she'd opened 3 months ago when she'd started to sense something was wrong. When Mira's smiles had started to feel more like threats, and her parents' disappointment had turned to disgust. She'd put $200 in it, money she'd earned from online freelance work she'd done late at night when she couldn't sleep, tormented by the feeling that she was failing some test she didn't know she was taking. Now it would have 50,000 more. Blood money. Severance pay for being born. "Get her out of my sight," Richard said without looking at her. 2 security guards, men who'd greeted her politely every day for 2 years, now grabbed her arms like she was a criminal. They marched her through the mansion she'd never quite learned to navigate, past rooms she'd never been welcomed into, toward the massive front doors that had seemed so full of promise the first time she'd walked through them. The rain was still falling, harder now. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The guard shoved her out onto the front steps, and her duffel bag landed in a puddle at her feet. "Don't come back," one of them said gruffly. "Mr. Hale's been clear. You show up here again, we call the police." The door slammed shut. Lena stood there in the rain, her clothes soaking through in seconds, staring at the brass knocker she'd polished once, as punishment for some imagined slight. Water ran down her face, rain mixed with tears she hadn't realized she was crying. From the window above, backlit by warm light, Mira's silhouette appeared. Even from here, even through the rain, Lena could see the smile. Then Mira drew the curtains closed. The city had never felt so enormous, or so hostile. Lena walked for hours, her duffel bag growing heavier with each block, her clothes stuck to her skin, her shoes squelching with water. She had nowhere to go, no friends. The family had isolated her from forming any real connections, always finding reasons to cancel plans or make her feel guilty for trying. No job. They'd forbidden it, saying a Hale daughter working was an embarrassment. No safety net except $50,000 that wouldn't hit her account until tomorrow. She found a 24-hour diner on the edge of downtown, the kind of place that had seen every type of human misery and learned to be quietly compassionate about it. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a kind smile, took one look at Lena's soaked, shivering form and brought her coffee without being asked. "Rough night, honey?" "You could say that." Lena's voice came out hoarse. She wrapped her hands around the mug, letting the heat sink into her frozen fingers. "You need food. You look half dead." "I don't have money yet. Tomorrow, but not—" The waitress waved her off. "First meal's on me. Can't have you dying in my booth. Bad for business." She winked, trying to coax a smile. Lena couldn't manage one, but she nodded gratefully. The food came. Soup, bread, something warm and simple that tasted like heaven after the rich, elaborate meals at Hale Manor that had always felt like they were being judged. Here, no one cared about her table manners or whether she knew which fork to use. Here, she was just another lost soul in a city full of them. "You got somewhere to stay?" the waitress asked when she came back to refill the coffee. Lena shook her head. "There's a women's shelter 2 blocks east. Decent place. They'll give you a bed for the night, no questions asked." A shelter. 2 years ago, she'd been sleeping in a mansion. Now she was headed for a homeless shelter. The irony would have been funny if it didn't hurt so much. "Thank you," Lena whispered. The waitress patted her shoulder. "We all hit bottom sometimes, sweetheart. Question is what you do when you get there. You gonna lie down and die, or you gonna dig your way back up?" Lena didn't have an answer. The shelter was exactly what she'd expected. Fluorescent lights, metal bunks, the smell of industrial cleaner trying to mask decades of desperation. But it was clean, safe, and the woman who checked her in asked no questions beyond her name. Lena didn't give her real one. "Ellen," she said, close enough to her own name that she'd remember it, different enough that if anyone came looking, they'd hit a dead end. Not that anyone would come looking, the Hales had made that abundantly clear. She was assigned a bottom bunk in a room with 11 other women. Some were elderly, some looked barely older than teenagers. All of them had that same look in their eyes. Life had chewed them up and spit them out, and they were trying to figure out if getting back up was worth the effort. Lena lay on the thin mattress, staring at the springs of the bunk above her, and let herself break. She cried silently, her face turned to the wall, her body shaking with sobs she'd held back for hours. For years, maybe. All the pain, all the rejection, all the desperate attempts to be good enough, to be loved, to be wanted, it all came pouring out in that dark, anonymous room. She'd lost everything. No, that wasn't quite right. She'd never had it to begin with. The family that was supposed to love her had seen her as defective, an embarrassment, a problem to be solved. The sister who was supposed to be on her side had systematically destroyed her from the inside out. The home that was supposed to be her haven had been a prison she'd decorated with hope and delusions. And now she had nothing, no name, no family, no identity, just $50,000 and a city that didn't care if she lived or died. First time? A voice whispered from the next bunk. Lena turned to see a woman about her age looking at her with understanding eyes. Is it that obvious? Lena's voice was wrecked from crying. The first night is always the hardest. You still remember what you lost. Give it a few days, and the memories start to fade. Makes it easier. I don't want to forget. The words surprised Lena even as she said them. I need to remember. I need to remember every single second of how this felt. The woman raised an eyebrow. Why would you want to do that to yourself? Lena wiped her face with the rough blanket, feeling something cold and hard crystallizing in her chest where her heart used to be. Because I'm never, ever going to let anyone make me feel like this again. Good luck with that. The woman rolled over, done with the conversation. But Lena meant it. She lay there as the night deepened, listening to the sounds of women sleeping, crying, murmuring prayers to gods who'd forgotten them. And she made a decision. The Hale family thought they'd broken her. They thought they'd crushed the weak, desperate girl who'd spent 2 years begging for scraps of affection. They thought she'd crawl back eventually, broken and repentant, willing to accept whatever humiliation they offered if it meant being part of the family again. They were wrong. Lena Hale, no, not Hale anymore, never Hale again, was done begging, done crying, done hoping for love from people who'd never seen her as human. She'd been poor before. She'd survived the countryside with nothing. She'd worked 3 jobs at 16 and put herself through high school while taking care of a dying grandmother. She'd endured and persevered through things that would have broken most people. The Hales had given her 2 years of hell disguised as luxury. They'd taught her how cruel people could be, how little blood meant when it came to loyalty. They'd shown her that money and power were the only things that mattered in their world. Fine. She'd learned to speak their language. And one day, maybe not soon, but one day, they would regret every single moment they'd spent destroying her. Not because she'd come back for revenge. Revenge was messy, emotional, beneath her. No, they'd regret it because she'd become everything they'd claimed she couldn't be. Successful, powerful, untouchable. She'd rise so high that they'd look up at her from the ruins of whatever was left of their precious empire, and they'd finally understand what they'd thrown away. The girl they'd discarded was dead. What rose from those ashes would be something none of them were prepared for. Morning came gray and cold. Lena checked out of the shelter at 6 a.m., her duffel bag repacked, her eyes dry. She'd cried her last tears in the night. Now there was only forward. The bank opened at 9. She was there at 8:30, waiting on the steps, watching the city wake up around her. Business people in expensive suits rushed past, coffee in hand, absorbed in their important lives. None of them looked at her. She was invisible to them, just another homeless person to step around. Good. Invisible meant underestimated, and underestimated meant dangerous. When the bank finally opened, she was the first customer through the doors. The account showed exactly $50,000 deposited at 6:47 a.m. Blood money, but money nonetheless. She withdrew $500 in cash and left the rest where it was. Her next stop was a cheap hotel on the edge of the business district, clean enough to be safe, anonymous enough to ask no questions. $40 a night, paid in cash. She took the room for a week, then she went shopping. Not at the boutiques the Hales had dragged her to, where salespeople had looked down their noses at her while pretending to fawn. Not at the department stores where Mira had accidentally led her to the clearance section while buying designer pieces herself. Lena went to thrift stores and discount retailers. She bought 3 pairs of jeans that fit, 5 plain shirts, 1 decent blazer, and a pair of shoes that didn't leak. Professional enough for job interviews, cheap enough that losing them wouldn't matter. She bought a laptop from a pawn shop, 3 years old but functional. And she bought coffee, cheap instant noodles, and a notebook. Back in her hotel room, she opened the notebook to a blank page and wrote a single question at the top. What do I know how to do? The list came slowly at first, then faster. Financial analysis, learned from secretly reading her father's business reports. Market research, absorbed from listening to family dinner conversations. Data analysis, taught herself through free online courses late at night. Programming basics, Python, learned from YouTube while everyone else slept. Accounting fundamentals, studied her grandmother's medical bills, trying to find ways to save money. Social media marketing, practiced by running anonymous accounts to understand how information spread. Languages, English, fluent, Mandarin, conversational from the countryside grandmother, French, learned from Mira's discarded tutoring materials. She stared at the list. It wasn't impressive by Hale's standards. They would have sneered at her autodidactic patchwork education. But it was more than nothing. It was a foundation. The next page. What markets are emerging? She spent 6 hours researching, using the hotel's Wi-Fi and every free resource she could find. She read articles, watched videos, analyzed trends. The Hales had mocked her for spending so much time on her laptop, assuming she was wasting time on social media. They'd never looked at her screen to see what she was actually doing, learning, absorbing, preparing for a future she'd somehow known she'd need. By midnight, she had 3 possibilities. 1. Sustainable technology, growing fast but requiring massive capital she didn't have. 2. Digital content creation, oversaturated, too competitive for someone starting from 0. 3. Cross-border e-commerce, specifically connecting small countryside manufacturers with international markets. The third option made her pause. She knew the countryside. She knew the manufacturers there, the small workshops producing everything from textiles to electronics, the family businesses desperate for markets beyond their small towns. She'd grown up among them, had worked for some of them, understood their world in a way no city-raised business person ever could. And she knew the international market from studying the Hales' import-export business. She'd sat through enough dinner conversations, absorbed enough casual discussion about supply chains and profit margins and market demands. What if she could bridge those 2 worlds? The idea was insane. She had no connections, no reputation, no business experience beyond observation. She'd be competing against established companies with decades of relationships and millions in capital. But she had something they didn't. She had nothing to lose. The Hales had taken everything. They'd left her with only the absolute essentials, herself, her mind, and the burning need to prove them wrong. Sometimes that was enough. The first call came 2 weeks later, when she was living on instant noodles and spending 18 hours a day building her business plan. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Hello? Is this Lena Hale? Her blood went cold. No one should have this number. She'd bought a burner phone, hadn't given it to anyone. Who is this? Detective Sarah Morrison, Metro Police. I'm calling about a theft investigation involving the Hale family. We need you to come in for questioning. Lena's hand tightened on the phone. I signed an agreement. The matter was settled privately. Yes, well, new evidence has come to light. We need your statement. I have nothing to say. Miss Hale. I'm not a Hale anymore. Read the documents. I gave up that name. A pause. Fine. Miss Ellen, then? That's the name you used at the shelter. So they'd tracked her that far. Lena felt sick. What do you want? The truth. Your sister Mira has filed an additional complaint claiming you stole jewelry worth over $200,000. Your father is pushing for prosecution. If you don't come in voluntarily, I'll have to issue a warrant. Mira. Of course it was Mira. Not content with getting Lena thrown out, she was now trying to get her imprisoned, trying to make absolutely certain Lena could never, ever rise again. I'll be there tomorrow, Lena said quietly. What time? 10 a.m. Ask for me at the front desk. Detective Morrison's voice softened slightly. Look, kid, I don't know what's going on with your family. but I've seen a lot of rich folks use the police to settle personal scores. You might want to get a lawyer. Can't afford one. Public defender, then. Don't come in without representation. The detective hung up. Lena sat on her hotel bed, the phone still pressed to her ear, and laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. They weren't going to let her go. They couldn't just discard her and move on. Mira needed to grind her into dust, needed to make absolutely certain Lena stayed destroyed. Fine. If they wanted a fight, she'd give them one, but not on their terms, not in their arena, not playing by their rules. Lena spent that night transferring her $49,000 remaining dollars into cryptocurrency and offshore accounts, spreading it across platforms the Hale's lawyers would need weeks to trace. She documented every piece of evidence she had, every text message Mira had sent her, every email, every conversation she could remember. She wrote it all down in excruciating detail. And then she went to the police station at 10 a.m. with a public defender who looked 12 years old and overwhelmed. Detective Morrison turned out to be a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a tired expression. She led Lena and the attorney to an interrogation room that smelled like fear and disinfectant. "Let's start with the jewelry," Morrison began. "Mira Hale claims you took a diamond necklace, 2 bracelets, and a ring from her room on the night you were removed from the house, worth approximately $215,000. Did you take those items?" "No." She has photographs of the empty jewelry boxes. Time stamped to that night. "I'm sure she does. She probably took the jewelry herself weeks ago and waited for the right moment to accuse me." The public defender, Jenkins, his name was, put a hand on Lena's arm. "You don't have to. I want to." Lena looked directly at Detective Morrison. "I want to tell you everything. Can I?" Morrison glanced at Jenkins, who shrugged helplessly, then nodded. "Go ahead." Lena took a breath. "I didn't steal anything, not the $50,000 from my grandmother's account and not the jewelry from Mira's room. But I can't prove it because Mira is very, very good at what she does. She's been systematically framing me since I arrived at that house 2 years ago. Why? Because I'm a threat to her." "A threat how?" "I'm the biological daughter. She's adopted. If I ever became close to the family, if they ever chose me over her, she'd lose everything. So she made sure that would never happen. She turned them against me slowly, carefully. Every accident, every mishap, every problem, she made sure they blamed me. And I was so desperate to be loved that I didn't see it happening until it was too late." Morrison's expression was carefully neutral. "That's quite an accusation." "I know. And I can't prove most of it. She's too smart for that." Lena leaned forward. "But here's what I can tell you. Check the jewelry. Wherever she claims I sold it, there will be no evidence of me. Check my bank accounts, my movements, everything. You won't find those items because I never had them. And ask yourself, why would I steal jewelry worth $200,000 when they'd just given me $50,000? Why would I risk prison for items I'd have to fence for a fraction of their value when I already had cash? People aren't always rational. I'm very rational, detective. I've had to be to survive, and stealing jewelry I couldn't possibly sell without getting caught would be the stupidest thing I could do." Lena sat back. "But you know what would make sense? Mira selling her own jewelry, hiding the money, and then claiming I stole it. That way, she profits twice, once from the sale, once from destroying me completely." Morrison was silent for a long moment. "Do you have any evidence of this pattern of framing you?" "Some. Text messages mostly, but they're subtle. Mira's not stupid enough to put anything directly incriminating in writing." "Can I see them?" Lena handed over her phone. The detective scrolled through the messages, her frown deepening. They weren't smoking guns. They were things like, "Sister, I'm so sorry about the coffee incident. I should have told you those investors were allergic to dairy. My mistake. I feel terrible about the dress mix-up. I really thought I told you it was a casual event. I hope you weren't too embarrassed. Don't worry about the cat situation. I'm sure he got into the cellar on his own. You weren't to know the door would lock behind you." Each message designed to look supportive while actually creating a record of Lena's supposed mistakes. "Clever," Morrison admitted, "but not proof." "I know." Lena felt the weight of inevitability settling on her shoulders. "So what happens now? Do I go to jail?" "Not today. I need to investigate further." Morrison closed her notepad. "But, Miss, whatever your name is, you should know that the Hale family is pushing hard for prosecution. Your father has hired a very expensive legal team. If I can't prove you're innocent, the DA will probably charge you just to avoid the political pressure. I understand. Do you? Morrison leaned across the table, her voice dropping. Because I don't think you do. You're a 19-year-old girl with no resources going up against one of the wealthiest families in the city. Even if you're innocent, even if I believe you, this could destroy your life. You could spend years in prison. You'll have a record. You'll never recover from this. Lena met her eyes steadily. I'm already destroyed, Detective. They made sure of that when they threw me out with nothing. Prison might actually be safer than the streets. Something shifted in Morrison's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. You're tougher than you look. I've had to be. All right, I'll investigate, properly. But you need to stay available. Don't leave the city. Where would I go? Lena asked bitterly. I have nowhere else. As she left the police station with Jenkins trailing behind, the attorney spoke up. You know, there might be something we can do. The messages aren't proof, but they're a pattern. If we can find a tech expert to analyze them, show that Mira was gaslighting you systematically, we might be able to build a harassment case. No, Lena's voice was flat. But no legal battles, no fighting them in court. They have infinite money and resources. I have none. They'll drag it out for years, bleed me dry, and win anyway. She looked at the young attorney. Thanks for trying, but I'm done playing defense. Then what are you going to do? Lena smiled, and it was not a kind expression. I'm going to disappear, and then I'm going to build something they can't touch, can't buy, can't destroy. I'm going to win in a way they never see coming. Jenkins looked confused. How? By being better than they ever imagined I could be. She walked away, leaving him standing on the courthouse steps, and she never looked back. That night, Lena changed her name legally. Not to Ellen. That was too close, too easy to connect. She became Elena Chen, taking her late grandmother's surname from the countryside. New name, new identity, new life. The girl named Lena Hale was dead, and what rose from her ashes had only one purpose: to prove every single person who'd given up on her catastrophically wrong. The first 3 months were hell disguised as freedom. Elena Chen, she had to remind herself of the name constantly, had to practice saying it in the mirror until it felt real, learned what it meant to truly have nothing. The hotel room became too expensive after the first month, so she moved to a rooftop storage unit someone was illegally renting out for $200 a month. No windows, no bathroom, just 4 concrete walls, a camping cot, and a space heater that barely worked. She showered at the gym she'd joined for $19 a month. She ate 1 meal a day, always the cheapest thing she could find. She worked on her laptop in coffee shops until the staff got tired of her nursing a single cup for 6 hours and kicked her out. Then she'd move to the public library until it closed at 9. Every dollar mattered. Every cent was calculated. The Hales had taught her to appreciate luxury. Poverty taught her to weaponize scarcity. At night, in her concrete box, she worked. The business plan evolved from a dream into a blueprint. From a blueprint into actionable steps. She needed 3 things: suppliers, buyers, and a platform to connect them. The suppliers were easy. She knew the countryside, knew the workshops and small manufacturers struggling to find markets beyond their provincial borders. She spent her dwindling money on bus tickets back to the villages she'd grown up in, showing up unannounced at factories and workshops. Remember me? She'd say to the owners, most of whom did. The poor girl who'd worked for them, who'd left for the city with hope in her eyes. They'd heard she'd found her real family, had gotten rich. Things changed. I'm back, and I have a business proposal. They were skeptical at first. A 19-year-old girl with no capital, no company, no track record. But Elena had something better than credentials. She spoke their language. She understood their struggles. She didn't talk down to them or treat them like ignorant provincials the way city buyers did. You make quality products, she told Mr. Zhang, who ran a small electronics workshop producing phone accessories. But you're selling them for nothing because you have no direct market access. The middlemen are bleeding you dry, marking up your products 300% and keeping the profit. Mr. Zhang nodded wearily. This is how it's always been. It doesn't have to be. Elena pulled out her laptop, showing him spreadsheets she'd created. I can connect you directly with international buyers, cut out the middlemen. You keep more profit, buyers pay less than they would through traditional importers. Everyone wins. Except you spend money to do this, and you have no money. Mr. Zhang wasn't stupid. Why would you do this? I take 15% commission on sales, nothing up front. I only profit if you profit. Elena met his eyes steadily. I need you to trust me, Mr. Zhang. I know that's asking a lot, but I have nothing to offer you except my word. I will work harder for your success than anyone you've ever dealt with, because your success is my only path forward. Something in her desperation must have rung true, because Mr. Zhang nodded slowly. 15%, but only after we receive payment. Deal. She shook his calloused hand, and she had her first supplier. Over the next 6 weeks, Elena visited 43 manufacturers. 22 agreed to work with her. They produced everything from textiles to small electronics, handicrafts to automotive parts. None of them were prestigious brands, but all of them made solid, affordable products that international markets would want if they knew the products existed. The suppliers were secured. Now came the harder part, finding buyers. Elena had no network in international business. She had no reputation, no references, no credentials. What she had was the internet and an almost supernatural ability to research. She spent 3 weeks analyzing import data, trade forms, and business directories. She identified small to medium-sized retailers in Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, and Latin America. Markets that wanted quality products but couldn't afford the premium brands or the massive minimum orders that large suppliers required. Then she started cold emailing. Hundreds of emails a day, each one carefully researched and personalized. She posed as a trade coordinator for a network of Chinese manufacturers, which was technically true even if it sounded more impressive than it was. The response rate was brutal. For every 100 emails, she got maybe 3 responses. Of those 3, 2 were scams and 1 was genuine interest. But 1 was all she needed to start. A small electronics retailer in Jakarta responded to her email about phone accessories. They were interested in Mr. Zhang's products. Could she send samples? Elena used the last of her money to have Mr. Zhang produce sample boxes and ship them to Jakarta. Then she waited, living on rice and hope, terrified she'd made a catastrophic mistake. 2 weeks later, the Jakarta retailer sent a purchase order for 5,000 units. 5,000 units. At 15% commission, Elena would make $3,200. It was more money than she'd seen since leaving the Hales. She called Mr. Zhang, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. I have an order, 5,000 units. Can you produce them? 5,000? Mr. Zhang sounded stunned. That's more than I sell in 6 months. Can you do it? A pause. Then, yes, but I need payment up front for materials. How much? $8,000. Elena's heart sank. She had maybe 2,000 left in her various accounts, scattered and hidden. I can give you 2 now. Can the buyer pay a deposit? She negotiated with the Jakarta retailer, who agreed to pay 30% up front. It was just barely enough to cover materials. Mr. Zhang started production, and Elena spent the next month in a state of constant anxiety, certain something would go wrong. But it didn't. The products shipped. The buyer received them. The quality was good. They paid in full. Elena's commission hit her account on a rainy Tuesday in November. $3,200. She sat in a coffee shop staring at the number on her phone screen, and she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. 6 months ago, she'd lived in a mansion where people spent more than this on a single dinner. Now, this felt like a fortune. More importantly, it felt like validation. It worked. Her insane plan actually worked. She immediately reinvested half the money into her next deals, reaching out to more buyers, coordinating more shipments. The other half went into improving her situation. A real apartment, nothing fancy but with actual walls and a bathroom. A better laptop, professional email hosting, a simple website that made her one-woman operation look legitimate. Word spread among the manufacturers. The crazy girl from the city who'd come back and actually delivered on her promises. More workshops signed on. More products became available. And in the international markets, whispers began circulating about a new trade coordinator who could get quality Chinese products at unbeatable prices with surprisingly reliable service. Elena's second month in business, she made $8,000 in commissions. Third month, $14,000. By month 4, she was handling multiple shipments per week, coordinating between 30 suppliers and 46 international buyers across 12 countries. She worked 18-hour days. She learned customs regulations in 6 languages. She became an expert on shipping logistics, international payment systems, and quality control. She negotiated with factory owners in the morning, retailers in the afternoon, and shipping companies at night. She had no life outside of work, no friends, no hobbies, no rest. Just the grinding, relentless pursuit of the next deal, the next client, the next proof that she could survive. The Hales would have called it obsession. Elena called it necessity. By month 6, she'd saved $47,000 and had a business generating consistent revenue. It wasn't impressive by corporate standards, but for a girl who'd been homeless 6 months ago, it was a miracle. That's when she made her first truly bold move. The emerging market she'd been watching wasn't electronics or textiles. It was something the Hales had mentioned once at dinner and dismissed as too niche, too risky. Sustainable packaging solutions. Elena had done her research. The global push toward environmental responsibility was creating demand for biodegradable, eco-friendly packaging materials. Major corporations were desperate to reduce their plastic usage, but most sustainable solutions were expensive, produced by a handful of companies that could charge premium prices. What if someone could produce quality, sustainable packaging at a fraction of the current cost? Elena found a manufacturer in rural Anhui province that had developed a process for creating packaging from agricultural waste, rice husks, wheat stalks, materials that would otherwise be burned or discarded. The products were functional, fully biodegradable, and could be produced for pennies compared to current market alternatives. The problem was scale. The manufacturer, a family operation run by a woman named Li Mei, couldn't afford to expand production. She had the technology, the materials, the expertise. What she lacked was capital. Elena met with Li Mei in the woman's small factory, which smelled like grain and hope. "I can connect you with buyers," Elena said. "I have contacts now, people who trust my recommendations. But you need to be able to produce at scale. That means investment." Li Mei laughed bitterly. She was in her 40s, hands weathered from years of manual labor, eyes sharp with intelligence that had never been given formal outlets. "Investment? Banks won't even return my calls. A woman from the countryside with an unproven technology? I'm a joke to them. What if I invested?" The words came out before Elena had fully thought them through, but once they were in the air, she didn't take them back. Li Mei stared at her. "You're a child. I'm 19. And I have $50,000 I'm willing to put into this." $50,000 isn't nearly enough to... It's enough to start. We prove the concept with a pilot production run. We get real-world results to show investors. We use those results to secure proper funding. Elena leaned forward, her intensity making Li Mei lean back slightly. "I believe in this product. I believe in you. And I'm willing to bet everything I have on both." "Why?" Li Mei's voice was suspicious. "You don't know me. Why would you risk everything?" Elena smiled, and there was something hard in it. "Because I know what it's like to be dismissed, underestimated, and shut out of opportunities because of who you are instead of what you can do. Because I need a big win, not just sustainable income. And because every instinct I have tells me this is the moment that changes everything." Li Mei studied her for a long moment. "You're either brilliant or insane." "Probably both. If this fails, you'll have nothing." "I've already had nothing. I survived it once. I can survive it again." Elena extended her hand. "But I don't plan to fail." Li Mei shook it. "Huand." The next 4 months were the most terrifying of Elena's life. She invested $45,000 of her $50,000 into Li Mei's operation, keeping $5,000 as an emergency cushion that felt simultaneously too much and nowhere near enough. The money went into expanding the production facility, buying additional equipment, and producing sample batches large enough to demonstrate scale capability. Elena simultaneously launched an aggressive campaign to find buyers, targeting mid-sized companies in Europe and North America that were publicly committed to sustainability but didn't have the budgets for premium eco-friendly packaging. She sent 372 emails. She made 214 phone calls. She created presentation materials that looked professional despite being designed on her aging laptop at 3 in the morning. She got rejected 361 times. The 11 companies that showed interest all asked the same questions. Who are you? What's your track record? Why should we trust you? Elena had learned from her earlier mistakes. She didn't try to sound bigger than she was. Instead, she leaned into the truth. I'm a small, independent trade coordinator who specializes in finding overlooked opportunities. I can't offer you the prestige of working with a major firm, but I can offer you quality products at prices none of them can match, with personalized service they can't provide. I succeed when you succeed, which means I'll work harder for you than any account manager at a big company ever would. Honesty turned out to be surprisingly effective. A sustainable goods company in Berlin agreed to a trial order, 5,000 packaging units. If the quality was acceptable, they'd consider a long-term contract. Elena coordinated the production with Li Mei, personally overseeing quality control because she couldn't afford any mistakes. The products were manufactured, tested, and shipped. Then came the longest 2 weeks of Elena's life, waiting for the Berlin company's response. The quality report came back on a Wednesday. Exceeds expectations. Requesting quote for monthly order of 50,000 units. 50,000 units monthly. At the commission and profit-sharing structure Elena had negotiated with Li Mei, that single contract would generate approximately $12,000 monthly in Elena's pocket. But more importantly, it was proof of concept. Elena took the Berlin contract and the quality reports to 3 investment firms, asking for meetings. 2 ignored her. The third agreed to a 15-minute call, probably out of curiosity about the audacity of a 19-year-old girl requesting venture capital. The partner who took the call was a man named David Wu, Taiwanese-American, early 40s, with a reputation for finding unconventional opportunities. You have an interesting proposal, he said after Elena's pitch. But what you're asking for, $2 million to scale production and expand into new markets, that's significant capital for an unproven operation run by someone with no business education or track record. I have 6 months of successful trade coordination, Elena countered. I have a proven product with a signed contract from a German company. I have relationships with manufacturers who trust me and buyers who've gotten results. What I don't have is the capital to scale, but the opportunity is real, the market is ready, and I'm the only one positioned to execute this specific vision. Why you? Wu asked. If this is such a good opportunity, why couldn't someone with more experience do it better? Because someone with more experience wouldn't have the relationships I've built. They wouldn't understand the manufacturers the way I do. They wouldn't be willing to work as hard as I'm willing to work. Elena paused. And because I have something that can't be taught or bought, I'm absolutely committed. This isn't just business for me. It's survival. It's proof that I'm worth something. You'll never find another entrepreneur who will pour more of themselves into making your investment successful. Wu was quiet for a moment. That's either very compelling or a red flag that you're emotionally unstable. Probably both, Elena admitted, but I'll make you money either way. He laughed. It was a genuine sound, surprised and pleased. I like you. You're honest about your desperation, which is refreshing. Most entrepreneurs pretend they don't need the money. He paused. I'll make you an offer. $1 million for 30% equity. That's my opening position. Elena's heart hammered. $1 million. It was more money than she'd ever imagined having access to. But 30% equity meant giving up a significant portion of ownership, and she'd learned from watching her father's business dealings that first offers were always negotiable. 20%, she countered. $1 million for 20%. I keep majority control. 25%, and I provide strategic guidance. I've built 3 successful import-export operations. You need my expertise as much as you need my money. Elena thought fast. Strategic guidance from someone who actually knew what they were doing could be invaluable, but giving up 25% meant she'd only own 75% of something that was entirely her creation. Then again, 75% of something real was worth more than 100% of nothing. 22%, she said. $1 million, 22% equity, strategic guidance, and you introduce me to your network. Final offer. Wu smiled. You drive a hard bargain for someone who's desperate. 22%. Deal. Deal. They shook hands over a video call, and Elena immediately went to the bathroom of the coffee shop she was calling from and threw up from sheer adrenaline. $1 million. She'd just secured $1 million in investment capital. The girl the Hales had thrown away had just convinced a venture capitalist to bet 7 figures on her. The money hit the company account. She'd legally incorporated as Chen Global Solutions 3 months earlier on a Friday. By Monday, Elena and Li Mei had expanded the production facility, hired 23 new workers, and ordered equipment that would triple their output capacity. David Wu proved to be as valuable as he'd promised. He introduced Elena to his network of international buyers, opened doors that would have stayed closed for years otherwise, and provided guidance on scaling operations that saved her from a dozen costly mistakes. "You have good instincts," he told her during one of their weekly strategy calls. "But instincts aren't enough. You need systems, processes, quality control mechanisms. Right now, you're running on adrenaline and willpower. That works when you're small, but as you scale, you'll need structure." Elena absorbed everything he taught her like a desperate student, which is exactly what she was. She hired a part-time accountant, then a full-time operations manager. She implemented inventory tracking systems and automated ordering processes. She transformed her scrappy one-woman operation into something that resembled an actual business. The growth was explosive. The Berlin company increased their order to 75,000 units monthly. 2 companies in California signed contracts. A major retailer in Australia started a pilot program. By month 10 of her business existence, Chen Global Solutions was coordinating over $2 million in transactions monthly. Elena's personal income, after reinvesting most of the profits back into the business, stabilized around $30,000 monthly. It wasn't Hale family wealth, but it was more money than she'd ever dreamed of earning. She moved into a real apartment in a decent neighborhood. She bought professional clothes. She hired a part-time assistant to handle the administrative work that was consuming her time, but she didn't slow down. If anything, she worked harder. Because despite the success, despite the money, despite the growing reputation of Chen Global Solutions in trade circles, Elena felt like she was always one mistake away from losing everything. The fear that had driven her from homelessness to solvency never quite left. Every night, she lay in her comfortable bed in her nice apartment, and she remembered the concrete storage unit, the shelter, the rain-soaked night when her father had called her nothing. She remembered Mira's smile as the curtains closed, and she worked harder. The first time someone recognized her, she was at a trade conference in Shanghai, attending as a legitimate business owner rather than a desperate girl with a dream. She was networking, exchanging business cards, when a woman approached her with a strange expression. "Excuse me, but are you Lena Hale?" Elena's blood went cold. She'd been using the name Elena Chen for almost a year. She'd buried Lena Hale so deep she sometimes forgot that person had ever existed. "I'm sorry, you have me confused with someone else," Elena said smoothly. "My name is Elena Chen." The woman frowned. "You look exactly like, I was at a charity event once, about 2 years ago. There was this girl, the Hale family's returned daughter. You could be her twin." "I have one of those faces." Elena smiled politely and extracted herself from the conversation as quickly as possible, but the encounter rattled her. She'd been so focused on building her business that she hadn't considered what would happen when her 2 worlds inevitably collided. The Hales were prominent in this city. The trade and business circles were smaller than they appeared. Eventually, someone would make the connection. She needed to be ready. Elena spent the next week researching the Hale family's current situation. What she found was grimly satisfying. The company her father had built was struggling. Several major contracts had fallen through over the past year. There were rumors of internal conflicts, financial difficulties, questions about leadership. Richard Hale's health was reportedly declining, stress-related, according to business gossip sites. And Mira Hale, the golden daughter, had been given a vice president position in the family company. According to the few articles Elena could find, Mira was bringing fresh ideas and modern strategies to the traditional Hale enterprise. Elena read those words and laughed out loud in her empty office. Fresh ideas, modern strategies. Those were corporate speak for making changes that sounded good but didn't actually work. Elena had seen enough of Mira's actual capabilities to know the girl was brilliant at manipulation and terrible at everything else. She wondered how long it would take for the Hales to realize their precious adopted daughter was destroying the company from the inside. Part of her wanted to accelerate that process. She had the resources now. She could dig into the Hale Corporation, find weaknesses, exploit them. She could destroy them the way they'd destroyed her. But Elena had learned something important over the past year. Revenge was expensive, time-consuming, and ultimately pointless. The best revenge wasn't destruction. It was indifference. It was building something so successful that the people who'd hurt you became irrelevant. Let the Hales collapse on their own. Elena had better things to do. Month 14 of Chen Global Solutions' existence brought the turning point Elena had been working toward. A major European conglomerate reached out, interested in sustainable packaging solutions for their entire product line. The contract would be worth $27 million over 3 years. It was the kind of deal that would transform Chen Global Solutions from a successful small business into a legitimate player in the international trade market. It was also the kind of deal that would attract attention. The conglomerate sent a team to personally inspect Li Mei's facilities and meet with Elena. They were impressed by the production quality, intrigued by the pricing, and cautiously optimistic about the partnership. "We have concerns about your company's size," the lead negotiator admitted during their final meeting. "You've demonstrated impressive growth, but this contract would represent a massive scaling challenge. How do we know you can handle it?" Elena had prepared for this question. "We can't, not with our current resources, but we're not proposing to handle it alone. Part of this contract would involve bringing in a strategic manufacturing partner, one with the facilities and experience to manage large-scale production while maintaining our quality standards and pricing model. Do you have such a partner in mind?" "I have 3 potential partners I've been in discussions with. All of them are established manufacturers with excess capacity looking for exactly this type of opportunity. We'd maintain quality control and client relationships while they handle the production scaling." It was a risk, admitting she needed help. But Elena had learned that honesty combined with solutions was more powerful than false confidence. The negotiator nodded slowly. "That's a mature approach. We appreciate the transparency." He glanced at his colleagues. "We'd like to proceed pending final approval from our board and verification of your proposed manufacturing partners." "Of course." They shook hands, and Elena maintained her professional composure until they left her office. Then she locked the door, sat down at her desk, and let herself shake with the enormity of what had just happened. $27 million. 3-year contract with a European conglomerate that would open doors to dozens of other major corporations. Chen Global Solutions was about to become a real company, not just successful, but significant. She called David Wu. "The European deal is moving forward, pending board approval, but they're interested." Wu let out a low whistle. "Elena, do you understand what this means? This puts you on the map, not just as a successful entrepreneur, but as a serious player in sustainable supply chain solutions. You'll be featured in trade publications. Business journals will want interviews. You'll be visible." "I know." "Are you ready for that? For people to know who you are?" Elena thought about the Hales, about the family that had thrown her away, about Mira, who'd probably forgotten Elena existed. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." Because it was true. She'd spent over a year hiding, building, preparing. She'd transformed herself from a homeless, desperate girl into a business owner with $1 million investment and a $27 million contract pending. The Hales had thrown away Lena Hale. But Elena Chen was someone they'd never imagined could exist. And it was time for them to find out what they'd lost. The contract was approved 3 weeks later. The announcement went out through official channels. Chen Global Solutions had secured a major partnership with European conglomerate Verdatech for sustainable packaging solutions. Initial contract value, $27 million over 3 years, with options for expansion. The business world took notice. Trade publications ran articles about the meteoric rise of Chen Global Solutions. Business journals requested interviews with the mysterious young entrepreneur who'd come out of nowhere. Investment firms that had ignored Elena's previous inquiries suddenly wanted meetings. Elena granted selective interviews, carefully crafting her public narrative. She didn't mention the Hales. That wasn't relevant to her business story. Instead, she focused on her background in rural manufacturing, her understanding of international markets, her commitment to sustainable solutions. She presented herself as someone who'd started with nothing and built something through intelligence, hard work, and strategic risk-taking, which was true, just not the complete truth. The profile in International Trade Review was the one that changed everything. It featured a full-page photograph of Elena in her office, professional, confident, successful. The article detailed Chen Global Solutions' growth, highlighted the Vertitech contract, and painted Elena as an example of next-generation entrepreneurship. The magazine was distributed to business leaders across Asia, Europe, and North America, including, Elena knew with absolute certainty, the Hale Corporation's offices. She didn't have to wait long for the reaction. 3 days after the article published, her assistant buzzed her office. "Miss Chen, there's a gentleman here to see you. He says he's from the Hale Corporation, and it's urgent." Elena's heart rate didn't change. She'd been expecting this. "Send him in." The man who entered was Uncle Thomas, her father's brother. The same uncle who'd called her countryside trash and laughed at her humiliation. He looked older than she remembered, more tired. His expensive suit couldn't hide the stress lines around his eyes. He didn't recognize her immediately. "Miss Chen, thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I'm Thomas Hale, representing Hale Corporation. We're interested in discussing potential collaboration opportunities with your company." Elena gestured to the chair across from her desk, her expression neutral and professional. "Please sit. What kind of collaboration did you have in mind?" "Well, we've been following your impressive growth. The Vertitech contract in particular caught our attention. Hale Corporation has significant manufacturing capabilities and international distribution networks. We believe there could be synergies between our operations." "I see." Elena steepled her fingers, studying him with the calm appraisal of someone who held all the power in the room. "What specifically are you proposing?" Thomas leaned forward, warming to his pitch. "A partnership structure where Hale Corporation provides manufacturing and distribution support, while Chen Global Solutions handles the sustainable packaging development and client relationships. We could potentially expand your current operations tenfold with our resources." "And what would Hale Corporation want in return?" "A reasonable equity stake. We're thinking 40% would be fair, given the value we'd be bringing." Elena smiled. It wasn't a kind expression. 40% of my company in exchange for manufacturing support I can source elsewhere and distribution networks I'm already building independently? That doesn't sound particularly reasonable, Mr. Hale." Something in her voice made Thomas pause. He looked at her more carefully, and she saw the exact moment recognition hit him. His face went pale. "Lena?" "That name doesn't exist anymore," Elena said quietly. "I'm Elena Chen, founder and majority owner of Chen Global Solutions. And you, Uncle Thomas, are currently trying to negotiate a deal with someone you once called countryside trash. How fascinating life can be." Thomas's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Elena stood, walking around her desk to stand in front of him. She was calm, collected, completely in control. "I'm going to give you some advice, and I suggest you listen carefully. Go back to Richard and tell him that Chen Global Solutions is not interested in partnerships with Hale Corporation. Not now. Not ever. Tell him that the daughter he threw away is doing just fine without his name, his resources, or his family. And tell him that if he tries to interfere with my business in any way, I have documentation of every instance of fraud, embezzlement, and manipulation that Mira committed, including the theft she framed me for. I've spent the past year having investigators quietly gathering evidence. I wonder what the business community would think of the Hale family's golden daughter if that information became public?" Thomas found his voice. "You're threatening us?" "I'm establishing boundaries. There's a difference." Elena returned to her chair, her posture relaxed, her eyes cold. "You made your choice about me 2 years ago. Live with it. I've moved on. I suggest you do the same." "Lena, please. Get out of my office, Mr. Hale, and don't come back." Thomas left, his expensive shoes clicking rapidly against the marble floor as he fled. Elena sat in the silence that followed, her hands steady, her breathing controlled. The girl they'd destroyed had just turned away the family that had once been her entire world, and it felt like freedom. The invitation arrived 3 weeks after Thomas Hale's humiliating exit from her office. Heavy cream cardstock, gold-embossed lettering, the kind of ostentatious display the city's elite used to separate themselves from ordinary people. Elena held it between two fingers like it might contaminate her. The annual International Investment Summit, the most prestigious business event in the city, where billion-dollar deals were made over champagne and canapes, where reputations were built or destroyed in a single conversation. An event Elena had never been invited to before because Chen Global Solutions, despite its rapid growth, was still considered too new, too small, too unproven. Except this year, the invitation bore her name in elegant script. Miss Elena Chen, founder and CEO, Chen Global Solutions. +1. She knew exactly why she'd been invited. The Vertitech contract had legitimized her in ways that months of successful trades never could. She was no longer just some upstart entrepreneur. She was someone who'd secured a $27 million deal with a European conglomerate. She was someone worth knowing. The summit was in 2 months. 2 months for Elena to prepare for the moment when her two worlds would collide in the most public, spectacular way possible. Because the Hale family would be there. They were always there, had been fixtures of the summit for 20 years. Richard Hale often gave a keynote speech about traditional business values and family legacy. Mira usually attended as his protege, smiling for cameras and making connections that the Hales believed would secure their dynasty for another generation. Elena could skip the summit. She could avoid the confrontation, maintain her distance, continue building her empire in peace. But where was the poetry in that? She called David Wu. "I need a consultant, someone who understands high society events and can teach me everything I need to know about navigating them." Wu laughed. "Elena, you've negotiated million-dollar deals. You've held your own with seasoned business people twice your age. Why do you need help with a party?" "Because business negotiations have rules I understand. High society has different rules, unspoken ones, and I can't afford to make mistakes." She paused. "The Hale family will be there. I need to be flawless." There was a long silence. Wu knew about the Hales. Elena had given him the abbreviated version when they'd first partnered, enough to explain why she'd changed her name and why she was so driven. "You're going to confront them?" "I'm going to exist in the same space as them. That's all. But I need to do it perfectly." "I know someone. Her name is Catherine Zhang. She's a former diplomat, now runs a consulting firm that specializes in exactly this kind of thing. She's expensive. I can afford expensive now. I'll make the introduction." Catherine Zhang turned out to be a woman in her 60s with silver hair, impeccable posture, and eyes that missed nothing. She met Elena at an upscale tea house, the kind of place where conversations happen in hushed tones and every detail was calculated for effect. "David tells me you need polish," Catherine said without preamble. "You've built an impressive business, but you're worried about fitting into the social circles where that business will need to operate. Is that accurate?" "Essentially, yes." Catherine studied her for a long moment. "You're not from money. I can tell from the way you hold your teacup, competent but not instinctive. You've learned to present yourself professionally, but you haven't internalized the casual confidence that comes from a lifetime of wealth. You're performing rather than being." Elena felt the familiar sting of being seen through, but she kept her expression neutral. "Can you teach me to stop performing?" "No. But I can teach you to perform so well that no one will ever know the difference." Catherine sipped her tea delicately. "It will take time, work, and a willingness to be uncomfortable. Are you prepared for that?" "I've been uncomfortable my entire life. What's a few more weeks?" Catherine smiled approvingly. "Good answer. We start tomorrow." The next 8 weeks were an intensive course in transformation. Catherine taught Elena the subtle signals of old money versus new money, how to dress expensively without looking like she was trying too hard, how to make conversation that seemed effortless while subtly directing the flow of information. She learned which topics were acceptable for discussion and which were gauche, how to network without appearing desperate, how to decline advances without giving offense. "You're selling a story," Catherine explained during one session, "not about where you came from. That's irrelevant and potentially damaging. You're selling the story of where you're going. You're young, brilliant, rising. You represent the future while respecting the traditions that built the present. That's the narrative that will open doors. Elena absorbed it all, practicing until the behaviors felt natural. She hired a stylist who helped her select an outfit for the summit, a deep emerald dress that was elegant without being flashy, expensive without being ostentatious, sophisticated but not trying too hard. The perfect balance. She also hired investigators to dig deeper into the Hale Corporation's current situation. What they found was even more satisfying than she'd hoped. The company was hemorrhaging money. 3 major contracts had fallen through in the past 6 months, all due to quality control issues that suggested internal problems. Several key employees had quit, citing concerns about leadership decisions. And there were whispers, just whispers, but persistent ones, about financial irregularities that hadn't quite reached the level of actionable fraud, but were definitely concerning. At the center of many of these problems, according to the investigators' report, was Mira Hale. Her fresh ideas had included restructuring deals in ways that looked good on paper, but created logistical nightmares. Her modern strategies had alienated long-term partners, and her personal spending on the company account had raised eyebrows among the accounting staff, though nothing had been officially reported. Elena read the reports with grim satisfaction. Mira was doing to the Hale Corporation exactly what she'd done to Elena, destroying it slowly, methodically, while maintaining a perfect facade of innocent competence. The difference was that the Hales couldn't throw away their company the way they'd thrown away their daughter. They were stuck watching Mira dismantle their legacy piece by piece, probably still believing she was trying her best. Elena could expose it all. She had the evidence, the documentation, the proof. One phone call to the right journalist and the Hale family would be ruined. But that would be too quick, too merciful. Elena wanted them to understand what they'd lost before they lost everything else. The night before the summit, Elena stood in her apartment looking at herself in the full-length mirror. The transformation was complete. The girl who'd been thrown out in the rain was gone, replaced by a polished, confident woman who looked like she belonged in any boardroom in the world. But underneath the designer dress and the professional makeup, Elena could still feel the concrete storage unit, the shelter bed, the rain. She would always feel it. That was the difference between her and the people she'd meet tomorrow. They'd never known what it meant to have nothing. They'd never understand the desperation that came from being erased. That was her advantage. She remembered. She carried her past like armor. Tomorrow, the Hales would learn what that armor could withstand. The International Investment Summit was held at the Grand Regency Hotel, a monument to excess with crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and staff who'd perfected the art of obsequious service. Elena arrived precisely 15 minutes after the official start time, early enough to show respect, late enough to avoid looking desperate. The ballroom was already packed with the city's business elite, tailored suits, designer gowns, jewelry that cost more than most people's annual salaries, conversations happening in clusters, deals being made in corners, alliances forming and dissolving with the fluidity of water. Elena moved through it all with the confidence Catherine had trained into her. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, made polite conversation with a textile importer she'd worked with previously, and gradually navigated toward the center of the room where the real power players congregated. That's where she saw them. Richard Hale looked older than the last time she'd seen him. His hair was grayer, his face more lined. He stood with a group of older businessmen holding court the way he always had, but there was something diminished about him, a tiredness that hadn't been there before. Victoria Hale stood nearby, elegant in a black gown, her expression carefully neutral as she surveyed the room, looking for threats, looking for opportunities, always calculating. And Mira, perfect, beautiful Mira in a white dress that made her look ethereal, innocent, untouchable. She was talking to a group of younger attendees, laughing at something one of them had said, her hand resting lightly on a man's arm in a gesture that managed to be both casual and possessive. Elena felt nothing looking at them. No anger, no pain, no residual longing for what might have been. Just cold assessment of targets and strategy. Elena Chen, as I live and breathe. David Wu appeared at her elbow, immaculate in a tailored suit. You clean up well. I had a good teacher. Elena smiled, genuine warmth breaking through her professional mask. Thank you for coming. Wouldn't miss it. This is going to be interesting. Wu glanced toward the Hales. Have they noticed you yet? Not yet. But they will. The opportunity came 20 minutes later when the summit organizers called everyone to attention for the opening remarks. The crowd migrated toward the small stage at the front of the ballroom, and Elena deliberately positioned herself where the Hales would have to pass her to reach their usual prime spots near the front. Victoria saw her first. Elena watched the recognition ripple across the woman's face. Confusion, then shock, then something that might have been fear. Victoria's hand shot out to grip Richard's arm, her champagne glass nearly sloshing over. "Richard," she hissed. "Richard, that's—" Richard turned, and his eyes met Elena's across 3 feet of expensive carpet. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The noise of the crowd faded into background static. Elena held his gaze steadily, letting him see exactly what he'd thrown away. "Lena?" Richard's voice came out strangled. "That name doesn't exist anymore," Elena said calmly, using the same word she'd given Thomas. "I'm Elena Chen, but I believe we've met before, Mr. Hale. Briefly. A long time ago." Mira had turned at the sound of her father's shocked tone. When she saw Elena, her perfect composure cracked for just a fraction of a second. Terror flashed across her face before she controlled it, replacing it with a mask of delighted surprise. "Sister!" Mira moved forward, arms outstretched as if for an embrace. "Oh my goodness, is it really you? We've been so worried. Where have you been?" The performance was flawless. Concerned, loving sister reunited with lost family member. Several people nearby turned to watch, curious about the drama unfolding. Elena stepped back, avoiding Mira's embrace. "I'm sorry. I think you have me confused with someone else. My name is Elena Chen. I don't have a sister." Mira's arms dropped, her expression shifting to hurt confusion. "What? Lena, it's me. It's Mira. What are you talking about?" "Miss Hale, I understand you're confused, but I've never met you before tonight." Elena's voice was polite but firm, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "Though I am familiar with your family's company, Hale Corporation, correct? I've read about some of your recent challenges." Richard found his voice. "What are you doing here?" "I was invited." Elena gestured with her champagne glass toward the summit materials everyone had received. Chen Global Solutions was extended an invitation based on our recent contract with Vertitech. Perhaps you've heard of it. $27 million over 3 years. We're quite proud of the partnership. The crowd was definitely paying attention now. Whispers rippled outward as people recognized the players in this unexpected drama. The Hales, pillars of the business community, confronting a young entrepreneur who claimed not to know them despite clear evidence to the contrary. "You can't just pretend you're not our daughter," Victoria hissed, stepping forward. "We have DNA tests, legal documents. You're Lena Hale and you're making a scene." "Actually, Mrs. Hale, I'm making a correction." Elena pulled out her phone, called up a document, and showed it to the nearest curious onlookers. "Legal name change, processed 18 months ago. Lena Hale ceased to exist. Elena Chen replaced her. As for being your daughter, I believe you terminated that relationship when you had me sign documents relinquishing all claims to the Hale family name and assets. I still have my copy if you'd like to refresh your memory." The whispers became a roar. This was better than anyone had expected from the summit's opening night. A family drama playing out in public, involving one of the city's most prominent dynasties and an up-and-coming entrepreneur no one had connected until this moment. Richard's face went purple. "You signed those documents because you stole from us, from your own grandmother. We gave you a choice between making amends or prosecution, and you chose to leave." "Is that the story you've been telling yourselves?" Elena's voice was soft, almost pitying. "How comforting that must be. Tell me, Mr. Hale, did you ever actually investigate that theft, or did you simply accept the evidence presented by your perfect adopted daughter without question?" Mira made a small sound of distress. "How can you say such cruel things? I loved you. We all loved you. You were just so troubled, so angry. We tried to help you, but—" "Stop." Elena's voice cut through Mira's performance like a knife. "I'm not the desperate girl you destroyed anymore. Your manipulations don't work on me, and they're about to stop working on everyone else too." "What are you talking about?" Mira's voice rose, genuine panic bleeding through the act. Elena smiled. It was not a kind expression. I'm talking about truth, the one thing you've never been able to control. She turned to address the crowd that had gathered around them, investment managers and corporate executives and journalists who'd been invited to cover the summit. Ladies and gentlemen, forgive me for disrupting your evening, but I believe it's time for some transparency. My name is Elena Chen, and 2 years ago I was Lena Hale, biological daughter of Richard and Victoria Hale. I was removed from their family after being framed for theft I didn't commit. The person who framed me was Mira Hale, their adopted daughter, who has spent years systematically manipulating this family while maintaining a facade of perfection. That's insane, Mira said, but her voice shook. She's lying. She's always been jealous of me, always tried to make me look bad. I have evidence. Elena pulled out a small USB drive from her clutch. 18 months of investigation into Mira's activities. Financial records showing she embezzled over $300,000 from the Hale Corporation. Communications proving she deliberately sabotaged company contracts to make herself appear valuable when she fixed problems she created. Testimony from employees she manipulated and discarded. And yes, proof that she stole $50,000 from her grandmother's account and planted evidence to frame me. The ballroom had gone completely silent. Every eye was on Elena, Mira, and the tiny USB drive that supposedly held proof of everything. Richard looked like he might collapse. You're bluffing. If you had evidence, you would have used it before now. Would I? Elena tilted her head. Or would I wait for exactly the right moment, for a very public venue where the truth would have maximum impact? I learned from the best, after all. Mira taught me that timing is everything. Show us the evidence, someone called from the crowd. Others murmured agreement. Elena handed the USB drive to David Wu, who'd positioned himself near a laptop connected to the large presentation screen typically used for summit speakers. David, if you would. Wu loaded the drive, and the screen flickered to life. The first document was a bank statement from Mira's personal account, showing deposits that matched almost exactly the amounts that had gone missing from the Hale Corporation's operating funds. The dates corresponded with periods when Mira had been given special access to company accounts. The second document was an email chain between Mira and a competitor discussing ways to undermine a Hale Corporation contract. The language was careful, deniable, but the intent was clear. The third was a recorded phone conversation, obtained legally, Elena's investigators had assured her, where Mira discussed her strategy of making herself indispensable to Richard by creating problems only she could solve. And the fourth was security footage from the Hale mansion, showing Mira accessing the grandmother's personal office late at night using the computer and then carefully wiping down surfaces to remove fingerprints. The crowd watched in stunned silence as document after document appeared on the screen. Each one was damning. Together, they painted an irrefutable picture of systematic fraud, manipulation, and betrayal. Mira's face had gone completely white. Where did you get those? Those are private evidence of public crimes, Elena interrupted. Obtained legally through investigation. You were so careful, Mira, so meticulous about your manipulations, but you made one critical mistake. What's that? Mira's voice was barely a whisper. You underestimated the girl you destroyed. You thought I'd stay broken. You thought I'd disappear and never become a threat. You never imagined I'd have the resources or the determination to expose you. Elena's voice was ice. You threw me away because you thought I was nothing. You were wrong. Richard had sunk into a nearby chair, his face ashen. Victoria stood frozen, her perfect composure shattered. Around them, the crowd buzzed with shock and speculation. A journalist pushed forward. Miss Chen, are you planning to press charges? That's up to the Hale family, Elena said calmly. I've provided this evidence to the appropriate authorities. Whether they choose to prosecute depends on whether the Hales want to protect their daughter or their reputation. Our daughter? Victoria found her voice, and it was raw with anguish. She's not our daughter. She's a parasite. She's been bleeding us dry while you threw away your actual daughter, Elena finished quietly. Yes, I know. Richard looked up at Elena with eyes full of devastation and something that might have been regret. I didn't know. I swear, Lena, I didn't know. My name is Elena, and whether you knew or not doesn't change what happened. You chose to believe her instead of me. You chose to throw me away rather than investigate. You chose to protect the daughter who loved you over the daughter who was inconvenient. Elena's voice didn't waver. Those were your choices. Now you get to live with the consequences. Mira suddenly lunged forward, desperation overwhelming her calculated facade. Please, please, Lena, I'm sorry. I was scared. I was scared of losing my family, of going back to nothing. You have to understand. I understand perfectly. Elena stepped back, maintaining distance. You were terrified of being replaced, so you made sure I could never be a threat. You destroyed me to save yourself. I get it. The difference is when I had nothing, I built something. When you're facing nothing, you'll have only the lies you've told and the people you've betrayed. I wonder which of your defenders will stand by you when the truth is undeniable. As if on cue, several business associates who'd been standing near the Hales quietly stepped away, creating physical distance from the scandal. The social calculus was already happening. Being associated with the Hales was now a liability rather than an asset. Richard stood slowly, looking older than his 60 years. What do you want from us? Money? An apology? What will make you stop this? I don't want anything from you, Elena said, and the truth of it rang clear in her voice. I stopped wanting anything from you the night you threw me out. I built a successful business without your name, your resources, or your approval. I secured deals you couldn't get. I created something that actually matters. I don't need you to give me anything because I already have everything I need. Then why do this? Victoria gestured at the screen, still displaying evidence of Mira's crimes. Why humiliate us publicly if you don't want anything? Because you asked what I'm doing here, Elena said simply. I'm here because I was invited as a legitimate business person. I'm here because I earned my place, and I'm here to make absolutely certain that every person in this room knows that Elena Chen is not someone to be dismissed, underestimated, or thrown away. What happened to you tonight isn't revenge, it's education. The summit organizer, a flustered man in his 50s, pushed through the crowd. Miss Chen, Mr. Hale, perhaps we should take this conversation somewhere more private. No need, Elena said. I've said everything I came to say. She turned back to the Hales one final time. I hope you find what you're looking for in the ruins of what Mira left you. I hope the perfect daughter was worth the real one. And I hope that someday, when you've lost everything else, you'll remember the moment you chose her over me and understand exactly what that choice cost you. She set down her champagne glass, turned, and walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for her like water, people stepping aside not out of pity or sympathy, but out of respect for someone who just dismantled an empire with nothing but truth. Behind her, she could hear the chaos beginning. Journalists swarming the Hales with questions, investors demanding explanations, security trying to restore order. And underneath it all, the sound of Mira crying, the perfect mask finally shattered beyond repair. David Wu caught up with Elena in the hotel lobby. That was the most devastating thing I've ever witnessed. Are you okay? Elena paused, considering the question. Was she okay? She'd just destroyed the family that had destroyed her. She'd exposed Mira's years of manipulation in the most public way possible. She'd burned bridges that could never be rebuilt, and she felt nothing but calm certainty that she'd done exactly what needed to be done. I'm fine, she said. Better than fine. I'm free. What happens now? Elena smiled. Now I go back to running my company. The Hales can deal with their own disaster. I'm done saving people who never wanted to be saved. They walked out of the Grand Regency Hotel together, leaving behind the chaos and the scandal and the family that had never truly been family at all. The night air was cool and clear. The city stretched out before Elena, full of possibilities and opportunities and futures that had nothing to do with the Hale name. Somewhere behind her, in that ballroom full of shocked business elite, the Hales were learning what it meant to lose everything. Elena didn't look back to see it happen. She didn't need to. She'd already won the only victory that mattered. She'd survived them, surpassed them, and proven that the girl they'd thrown away was worth more than everything they'd tried to keep. The rest was just consequences catching up to people who'd forgotten that truth always finds a way to surface. And sometimes, just sometimes, The discarded daughters of the world get to watch their destroyers face exactly what they deserve. The scandal broke across the business world like a tidal wave. By morning, every major publication in the city had run the story. Hale Corporation rocked by fraud allegations. Golden Daughter's dark secrets exposed. Investment summit turns into public reckoning for prominent family. Elena read the headlines over coffee in her apartment, the same calm settling over her that had carried her through the previous night. Her phone had been ringing constantly since dawn. Journalists requesting interviews, business associates offering support, competitors circling like sharks who'd smelled blood in the water. She ignored most of them. The story would run its course with or without her participation. She'd said everything she needed to say in that ballroom. David Wu was the only call she answered. "Have you seen the news?" "Hard to miss it," Elena said dryly. "The authorities are moving fast. Apparently, your evidence was compelling enough that they're opening a formal investigation into Mira Hale. There's talk of charges, fraud, embezzlement, possibly more." Wu paused. The Hale Corporation's stock dropped 17% at opening bell. Several board members are calling for Richard's resignation. That was inevitable once the truth came out. "You don't sound surprised." "I'm not. Mira's been hollowing out that company for years. I just accelerated the collapse." Elena set down her coffee cup. "The question is what they do now. Do they fight to save the company, or do they try to save Mira?" "My money's on the company. Richard Hale built that empire. He won't let it die, even for her." Elena thought about the devastation in her father's eyes last night. "We'll see." The answer came faster than she'd expected. By noon, the Hale Corporation had released a statement officially terminating Mira Hale's employment and cooperating fully with the authorities' investigation. They were cutting Mira loose, throwing her to the wolves to save themselves, exactly what they'd done to Elena 2 years ago. The irony was almost poetic. Elena's assistant buzzed her office that afternoon. "Miss Chen, there's someone here to see you. She says she's your mother, and it's urgent." Elena's hand tightened on her pen. "Tell her I'm not available." "I did. She says she'll wait as long as it takes." Of course she would. Victoria Hale had always been persistent when she wanted something. Elena could have security escort her out. She could continue refusing to see her. But there was something to be said for closure, for letting Victoria say whatever desperate plea she'd prepared and then shutting the door on the Hales forever. "Give me 10 minutes. Then send her in." Elena used those 10 minutes to center herself, to remember who she was now versus who she'd been the last time she'd faced Victoria. She was Elena Chen, successful entrepreneur, not Lena Hale, desperate daughter begging for scraps of affection. When Victoria entered, Elena almost didn't recognize her. The elegant, perfectly composed matriarch looked wrecked. Her makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes, or the way her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her designer handbag. She'd aged a decade overnight. "Thank you for seeing me," Victoria said quietly, standing awkwardly by the door like she wasn't sure she was allowed further into the room. "You have 15 minutes, Elena said, not inviting her to sit. "Use them wisely." Victoria flinched at the coldness in her tone, but moved closer to Elena's desk. "I came to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, to tell you that we were wrong about everything." "I know you were wrong. I don't need you to tell me that." "Elena. Elena." Victoria's voice broke on the name. "We made a terrible mistake. We believed Mira when we should have believed you. We threw you away when we should have protected you. We destroyed our own daughter because we were too blind to see the truth." "Yes, you did all of those things." Elena's voice remained flat, clinical. "Is there a point to this confession, or are you just cataloging your failures for my entertainment?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I'm your mother. I carried you for 9 months. I gave birth to you, and then I lost you. And when I found you again, I failed you in every possible way. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so desperately sorry." "You're not sorry you failed me," Elena said quietly. "You're sorry you're facing consequences. There's a difference." "That's not true, isn't it? If Mira had never been exposed, if your company wasn't collapsing, if your reputation wasn't in ruins, would you be here? Would you have ever apologized for throwing me out? Or would you still be living your perfect life with your perfect daughter, comfortable in the belief that you'd made the right choice? Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it. The answer was written all over her face. That's what I thought. Elena stood, walking to the window that overlooked the city. You're here because your world is falling apart, and you're looking for something to save, someone to rescue you, and you thought the daughter you discarded might be desperate enough for family that she'd forgive everything and help you rebuild. We need you, Victoria whispered. The company is dying. Your father is dying. The stress, the shock. He had a heart attack last night. He's in the hospital. The doctors say the next few days are critical. Elena felt something twist in her chest, but refused to let it show on her face. A heart attack. Richard Hale, the invincible patriarch, felled by the consequences of his own choices. I'm sorry to hear that, she said, and meant it. Despite everything, she didn't actively want Richard dead. She just wanted him irrelevant. But I don't see what that has to do with me. You could save the company. You have the business acumen, the connections, the vision. The board would accept you if you came back. If you took the Hale name again and… Stop. Elena turned from the window, her expression hard. Let me be absolutely clear about something. I will never, ever take the Hale name again. I will never work for the Hale Corporation. I will never step into that family again, no matter how much you beg or what you offer. That bridge didn't just burn. I salted the earth where it stood. But you're our daughter, our blood. Doesn't that mean anything? You taught me it didn't. Remember? DNA is just biology. It doesn't make you family. Those were Uncle Thomas's words, but you all agreed. You chose Mira because you raised her, because she reflected your values, because she was everything you wanted in a daughter. Elena's voice was steady, relentless. Well, you made your choice. Now live with it. Victoria collapsed into the chair Elena hadn't offered, her perfect composure completely shattered. What do you want from us? Money? Public acknowledgement? A formal apology? Name your price, and it's yours. I don't want anything from you. How many times do I need to say that before you believe it? I don't need your money. I make my own. I don't need your acknowledgement. I've built a reputation that has nothing to do with your name. I don't need your apology because it won't change what happened. Elena moved back to her desk, putting that physical barrier between them. I needed you 2 years ago when I was homeless and terrified and alone. I needed you when Mira was destroying me piece by piece. I needed you when you signed those documents and threw me into the street. Where were you then? We didn't know. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. You chose willful ignorance because the truth would have been inconvenient. You chose comfort over justice. You chose the daughter who made you feel good over the daughter who needed you. Elena's voice dropped to something cold and final. Those were your choices. I'm simply refusing to rescue you from the consequences. Victoria was crying openly now, mascara running down her cheeks in black streams. Your father is dying and you don't care at all? You're just going to let him die knowing his real daughter hates him? I don't hate him. I don't hate any of you. That would require me to still be emotionally invested in your lives. Elena sat down, her posture relaxed, her voice calm. You're strangers to me now. Strangers who happen to share some DNA and a very unpleasant history. Your problems are not my problems. Your pain is not my responsibility. I'm sorry Richard is sick, genuinely. But that doesn't obligate me to save him or you or the company you destroyed through your own incompetence and misplaced trust. How can you be so cold? You taught me to be. Every time you chose Mira over me, every time you dismissed my pain, every time you threw my attempts at connection back in my face, you taught me that sentiment is weakness, that love is a liability, that the only person I can truly rely on is myself. Elena smiled without humor. I'm just applying the lessons you spent 2 years drilling into me. Victoria stood shakily, accepting that she'd get nothing from this visit. I hope someday you understand what it's like to make a mistake you can't take back. I hope you know the pain of losing someone you love and realizing too late that it was your own fault. I already do understand, Elena said quietly. I lost my family when I was 17. When they came to get me from the countryside, I thought I was being saved. I thought I was going home. Instead, I learned that my family never wanted me. that I was a mistake they'd correct by embracing the imposter who'd taken my place. I lived that pain every single day for 2 years. The difference is, when I lost everything, I didn't have the luxury of begging someone else to fix it. I had to save myself. I suggest you learn to do the same." Victoria walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. "When Richard dies, and the doctors say it's when, not if, you'll have to live with the knowledge that you could have saved him and chose not to. No, Mrs. Hale. When Richard dies, you'll have to live with the knowledge that you killed him by protecting the wrong daughter. Don't put your guilt on me. I have enough of my own." Elena turned back to her computer, a clear dismissal. "Your 15 minutes are up. Please leave." Victoria left without another word, and Elena sat in the silence of her office, staring at her computer screen without seeing it. She'd meant every word she'd said. She wouldn't save them. She wouldn't go back. She was done. But the news about Richard's heart attack sat heavy in her chest anyway, an unwanted weight she couldn't quite shake. The calls started that evening, first from Uncle Thomas, begging her to reconsider, to think of the family legacy. Then from Aunt Melissa, crying and pleading. Then from cousins she barely remembered, suddenly very interested in maintaining family connections now that they needed something from her. Elena blocked every number, changed her phone, made it clear through her assistant that any Hale family member attempting to contact her would be escorted out by security. She went back to work. The Vertitech contract needed attention. A new supplier in Guangdong required vetting. The business didn't stop for family drama, and Elena was grateful for the distraction. But 3 days later, David Wu called with news she couldn't ignore. "Richard Hale died this morning. The hospital just released the statement." Elena set down the contract she'd been reviewing. "I see. Are you okay? Was she?" Elena examined her feelings with clinical detachment. Sadness, but distant, like mourning a stranger. Regret for what could have been if they'd been different people. Relief that the door was finally, irrevocably closed. Guilt that she felt relief. "I'm fine," she said. "It's unfortunate, but not unexpected." "The funeral is in 4 days. Will you attend?" "No, I wasn't his daughter anymore. I don't belong there." "Elena, regardless of what happened between you, he was still your biological father. People will notice if you don't go. It could look, I don't care how it looks. Let them think I'm cold, heartless, whatever they want. I'm not going to stand in a church and pretend to mourn a man who threw me away. I'm not giving the Hales the satisfaction of my grief or my presence." Elena's voice was firm. "They made their choice about who belonged in that family. I'm honoring it." Wu sighed. "All right, I'll respect your decision, but be prepared for backlash. People already think you're ruthless after the summit. Not attending your father's funeral will cement that reputation." "Good. Let them think I'm ruthless. Maybe they'll be less likely to underestimate me." The funeral came and went. Elena saw the photos in the society pages. The elegant service, the tasteful flowers, the mourners in expensive black. Victoria, aged and broken, supported by relatives. Mira, conspicuously absent, reportedly under house arrest pending the investigation. And no Elena, the biological daughter who'd chosen business over family, ambition over filial duty. The think pieces practically wrote themselves. The cost of success, when ambition destroys family bonds. Elena Chen's ruthless rise, a cautionary tale. The daughter who chose revenge over reconciliation. Elena read them all and felt nothing. Let them judge. None of them knew the full story. None of them had lived through what she'd survived. The business world, interestingly, had a different reaction. Several investors reached out with new opportunities, impressed by what they saw as strength and unwillingness to be manipulated by sentiment. Elena's reputation as someone who couldn't be bullied or guilt-tripped into bad decisions became an asset. Chen Global Solutions received 3 major contract offers in the week following Richard's funeral. Elena accepted all of them, expanding her operations into markets she'd been cautiously approaching for months. 2 weeks after Richard's death, Victoria tried one final time. She appeared at Elena's office building, this time with lawyers and official-looking documents. Elena's assistant called up, flustered. "Miss Chen, Mrs. Hale is here with her legal team. They're saying something about Richard's will and insisting they need to see you." "Send them to the conference room. I'll be there in 5 minutes." Elena took that time to call her own lawyer, putting him on standby, then walked into the conference room with her armor fully in place. Victoria sat at the head of the table, flanked by two stern-looking men in suits. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by grief and consequences. "Elena, thank you for seeing us," she began, her voice carefully controlled. "This is a professional meeting, so I'll extend professional courtesy. What do you want?" One of the lawyers cleared his throat. "Miss Chen, I'm Robert Davidson, representing the Hale estate. As you may know, Richard Hale recently passed, and his will is being executed. You are mentioned in that will." Elena raised an eyebrow. "I renounced all claims to the Hale family assets 2 years ago. The documents are legally binding." Those documents specifically addressed assets existing at the time of their execution. This is a new bequest, made 3 days before Mr. Hale's death, after he learned of your current success and the truth about Mira's actions. The lawyer slid a document across the table. Elena picked it up, scanning the legal language quickly. Richard had left her 40% of the Hale Corporation, along with a personal letter explaining his final wishes. She set the document down carefully. "I don't want it." Victoria leaned forward desperately. Elena, please, this is your father's dying wish. He wanted you to have the company. He wanted you to rebuild what we destroyed. He wanted to make amends. He wanted to use me to save his legacy. There's a difference." Elena pushed the document back across the table. "I told you before, I will never work for the Hale Corporation. I will never take responsibility for cleaning up your disasters. If Richard wanted to make amends, he should have done it while he was alive. A deathbed attempt to manipulate me into saving his company doesn't qualify." "It's worth millions," Davidson said, as if Elena didn't understand what she was refusing. "With your 40% and Mrs. Hale's 30%, you'd have controlling interest. You could rebuild the company, restore its reputation, or I could let it die, which is exactly what it deserves." Elena stood. "I refuse the bequest. Put it in writing, make it official, do whatever legal maneuvering you need. I don't want the Hale Corporation, I don't want the Hale money, and I don't want the Hale name attached to me in any way. Are we clear?" "You can't just refuse," Victoria said desperately. "There are legal processes, obligations. I can refuse, and I am refusing. If the legal process requires me to formally reject the inheritance, then prepare the documents and I'll sign them. But the answer is no. Today, tomorrow, forever. No." The second lawyer spoke up. "Miss Chen, perhaps you don't understand the full implications. The Hale Corporation is failing. Without intervention, it will be bankrupt within 6 months. Hundreds of employees will lose their jobs. Your family's legacy will be destroyed. Richard's life work will be gone." "That's very sad. It's also not my problem." Elena looked at each of them in turn. "Let me explain something to you. Richard Hale chose to believe Mira over me. He chose to throw me out rather than investigate the truth. He chose his reputation and his comfort over his own daughter. Those choices had consequences. The company falling apart is one of those consequences. It's unfortunate, but it's justice. I'm not going to subvert justice to save people who wouldn't do the same for me." "There has to be something we can offer you," Victoria said, her voice breaking. "Something you want, something we can give." "What I wanted was a family who loved me unconditionally. What I wanted was parents who protected me instead of destroying me. What I wanted was to matter more than the comfortable lie you'd built your lives around." Elena's voice was steady, but something raw bled through. "You couldn't give me those things when I was desperate for them. You certainly can't give them to me now. So no, Mrs. Hale, there's nothing you can offer me. You have nothing I want except distance." She walked out of the conference room without waiting for a response, leaving behind the inheritance and the lawyers and the last desperate attempt to pull her back into a family that had never truly wanted her. The news that Elena Chen had refused a 40% stake in the Hale Corporation, worth an estimated $37 million, made headlines. Business analysts called it foolish, short-sighted, driven by emotion rather than logic. They didn't understand that it was the most logical decision Elena had ever made. Accepting would mean tying herself to the Hales forever, spending years trying to rebuild something that was rotten at its foundation, sacrificing her own success to salvage their failure. Refusing meant freedom. It meant walking away clean, unencumbered, focused entirely on her own future rather than their past. 2 months after Richard's death, the Hale Corporation declared bankruptcy. The company that had been a pillar of the city's business community for 3 generations collapsed under the weight of bad decisions, fraud investigations, and leadership failures. The assets were liquidated. The employees scattered to other companies. The Hale name, once synonymous with success and stability, became a cautionary tale about the dangers of nepotism and misplaced trust. Victoria lost everything: the company, the mansion, the social position she'd spent her life cultivating. She moved into a modest apartment, supported by whatever remained after the creditors and lawyers had taken their shares. Mira was convicted on multiple charges of fraud and embezzlement. She received a 5-year prison sentence, her perfect facade finally stripped away completely. In the courtroom, when the verdict was read, she'd looked at Elena with something between hatred and desperate appeal. Elena had looked back with nothing but indifference. Mira had gotten exactly what she'd earned, nothing more and nothing less. The extended Hale family, the uncles and aunts and cousins who'd mocked Elena and dismissed her, found their own circumstances significantly reduced without the family company to provide status and opportunities. They scattered to the winds, diminished and largely forgotten. And through it all, Elena kept building. Chen Global Solutions expanded into new markets, secured new contracts, established itself as a major player in sustainable supply chain solutions. Her company's valuation reached 8 figures, then 9. Job offers came from Fortune 500 companies wanting her expertise. Investment opportunities appeared from venture firms who'd rejected her just 2 years earlier. Elena accepted some offers and rejected others, always strategic, always focused on long-term growth rather than short-term gains. She built an empire that had nothing to do with the Hale name and everything to do with her own vision and determination. The girl they'd thrown away became the woman they could never reach, never touch, never hurt again. And when former Hale family members occasionally tried to reach out, asking for jobs, for money, for help with business ventures, Elena's assistant had standing instructions to politely but firmly decline. The Hales had taught her a valuable lesson. Family was only worth something if it was mutual. One-sided devotion was just exploitation wearing a prettier name. Elena had learned that lesson well, and she would never, ever forget it. The regret they felt, the apologies they offered, the desperate attempts to rebuild bridges, all of it came too late. Years too late. Lifetimes too late. Elena had moved on, and she never looked back. 3 years after the Hale Corporation's collapse, Elena Chen stood in the penthouse office of her company's new headquarters building, looking out over the city that had once seemed so hostile and enormous. The view stretched for miles, encompassing the financial district where deals worth billions were negotiated daily, the harbor where shipping containers arrived from the international partners she'd cultivated, and somewhere in the distance, the neighborhood where she'd once slept in a storage unit wondering if she'd survive the week. She'd not only survived, she'd conquered. Chen Global Solutions now employed over 300 people across 4 countries. The company's valuation had crossed the billion-dollar threshold 6 months ago, making Elena one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country. She'd been featured on magazine covers, invited to speak at international conferences, and courted by governments wanting to replicate her sustainable supply chain model in their own economies. At 23 years old, Elena had built something that would outlast her, something that mattered beyond profit margins and stock valuations. She'd created jobs, enabled small manufacturers to reach global markets, and proven that sustainable business practices could be both ethical and enormously profitable. The girl the Hales had thrown away had become someone they could never have imagined in their wildest projections. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Miss Chen, your 2 o'clock appointment is here. Should I send them in?" Elena checked her reflection in the window glass one last time, smoothing down the jacket of her tailored suit. "Give me 2 minutes, then yes." She'd been expecting this meeting for months, ever since the investigative journalist had first reached out requesting an interview for a comprehensive piece on her rise in the business world. Elena had delayed, postponed, found excuses, but eventually she'd realized that controlling her own narrative was better than letting others write it for her. The journalist who entered was a woman in her 40s named Sarah Pack, known for incisive profiles that revealed the human stories behind business success. She carried a digital recorder and a notepad, her expression professionally neutral. Miss Chen, thank you for finally agreeing to this interview. I know you've been reluctant to discuss your personal history. I'm a private person, Elena said, gesturing for Sarah to sit. But I've come to understand that privacy and silence are sometimes mistaken for shame. I have nothing to be ashamed of. That's an interesting opening statement. Let's start there then. Your rise has been called meteoric, unprecedented, even suspicious by some. How do you respond to people who wonder if there's more to the story than hard work and business acumen? Elena smiled slightly. There's always more to every story. But if you're asking whether I had secret advantages or hidden backing, the answer is no. I started with $50,000 and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. Everything that came after was built on that foundation. $50,000 from where? Your company registration lists you as the sole founder, but most entrepreneurs at 19 have some form of family support or investor backing. The $50,000 was severance pay from a family I was removed from. They gave me that money to disappear from their lives. I used it to build something they could never touch. Elena's voice was matter-of-fact, revealing the information she'd decided was necessary to tell her story without giving it emotional weight. Sarah's eyes sharpened with interest. The Hale family. I did my research, Miss Chen. You were born Lena Hale, biological daughter of Richard and Victoria Hale. Removed from the family 2 years before you founded Chen Global Solutions. The timing is notable. The timing is everything, Elena corrected. Being removed from that family was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to rely on myself, to build something from nothing, to prove that I was worth more than they'd ever acknowledged. Some would call that a revenge narrative. Some would be wrong. Revenge is about hurting the people who hurt you. I was never interested in that. I was interested in becoming so successful that their opinions became irrelevant. Elena leaned back in her chair, completely at ease. The Hale family's collapse happened because of their own poor decisions and the fraudulent actions of someone they chose to trust over me. I didn't cause that. I simply declined to prevent it. You refused an inheritance worth tens of millions of dollars, a 40% stake in a company you could have saved. Why? Because saving them would have required sacrificing myself. Again. I'd already spent 2 years being sacrificed for their comfort. I wasn't going to volunteer for more. Elena's gaze was steady, unflinching. People struggle with that decision because they can't imagine choosing their own well-being over family obligation. But that's the fundamental question I had to answer. Did I owe the family that rejected me more than I owed myself? I decided the answer was no. Sarah made notes, her expression thoughtful. You've been called ruthless, cold, even cruel for that decision. Does that bother you? Should it? People who've never been in my position feel entitled to judge my choices. They imagine they would have been more forgiving, more generous, more noble. Maybe they would have been. Or maybe they just can't conceive of the kind of pain that makes forgiveness impossible. Elena stood, walking to the window. I'm not cruel. I'm simply done allowing people to hurt me in the name of family, obligation, or any other concept that asks me to set myself on fire to keep others warm. What about your biological mother, Victoria Hale? She's living in relative poverty now. Do you ever consider helping her? No. Victoria made her choices when she had all the power. She chose to believe a manipulator over her own daughter. She chose to throw me away rather than investigate the truth. She chose comfort over justice. Now she's living with the consequences of those choices, just like I lived with the consequences of her decisions for 2 years when I had nothing. Elena turned back to face Sarah. I don't wish her harm, but I also don't wish her rescue. She's not my responsibility simply because we share DNA. She lost the right to call herself my mother when she chose someone else's daughter over me. And your adopted sister, Mira Hale? She's currently serving time for fraud and embezzlement. Do you feel any satisfaction about her conviction? Elena considered the question carefully. Satisfaction isn't quite the right word. Justice feels more accurate. Mira destroyed me systematically over 2 years, and she destroyed the Hale Corporation over 3. She stole money, manipulated people, ruined lives. Her conviction wasn't about me, it was about accountability. I feel the same way about it that I'd feel about any criminal being appropriately sentenced. It's right, but it's not personal anymore. Not personal? She framed you for theft, turned your family against you, cost you 2 years of suffering. All of that is true. And for a long time, I carried rage about it. But rage is exhausting, and it's unproductive. Somewhere along the way, I realized that the best response to Mira wasn't anger. It was indifference. She wanted to destroy me. Instead, I became successful beyond anything she could have imagined, and she destroyed herself. That's not revenge. That's just the natural consequence of character. Elena returned to her seat, her posture relaxed. Mira will serve her sentence and eventually be released. When that happens, I hope she builds a better life. But she'll do it without any help from me, just like I built my life without help from the people who should have protected me. Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing. You've built an extraordinary company and amassed significant wealth. What drives you now? What's the point when you've already proven everything you set out to prove? It was a good question, one Elena had asked herself during the rare, quiet moments between deals and decisions. I stopped trying to prove things about a year ago. Now I'm building because I can. Because the work matters. Because creating opportunities for others gives my success meaning beyond just accumulating wealth. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I employ over 300 people. I've helped 47 small manufacturers reach international markets. I've proven that sustainable business practices can be profitable. That matters more than any vindication I could get from the people who doubted me. Do you ever regret the path you chose? Walking away from your family, refusing reconciliation, building this empire alone? Never. Not once. Not even for a moment. Elena's voice was absolutely certain. Every alternative path I can imagine involves compromising myself to make other people comfortable, accepting less than I deserved, sacrificing my well-being for people who wouldn't do the same for me. I chose myself, and I'd make that choice again every single time. Even knowing that your father died possibly partially because of the stress of your public exposure of Mira's crimes? It was a pointed question designed to provoke guilt or defensive anger. Elena felt neither. Richard Hale died because he spent years protecting the wrong daughter and his body couldn't handle the stress when the truth finally emerged. That's tragic, but it's not my fault. I didn't create the situation. I just refused to hide the truth to protect him from it. If telling the truth about fraud and manipulation contributed to his stress, that says more about his complicity than my cruelty. Sarah made more notes, then looked up with something like respect in her eyes. One final question. What would you say to young women who find themselves in similar situations? Rejected by family, starting with nothing, facing a world that seems impossible to navigate? Elena thought about the girl she'd been 3 years ago, soaked with rain and desperation, standing outside a mansion that had never been home. She thought about the storage unit, the shelter, the nights when giving up seemed easier than continuing to fight. I tell them that the people who reject you are revealing their own limitations, not yours. I tell them that rock bottom is just a foundation you haven't finished building on yet. I tell them that survival isn't pretty or noble or inspirational. It's brutal and exhausting, and sometimes you hate yourself for choosing to keep going. Elena's voice softened slightly. But I'd also tell them that there's power in having nothing left to lose. That when you've been stripped of everything except yourself, you discover exactly how strong you actually are. And I tell them that the best response to people who throw you away isn't crawling back or destroying them. It's building something so extraordinary that their rejection becomes meaningless. Sarah set down her pen. The interview clearly concluded, but something personal entering her expression. For what it's worth, I think you're exactly as ruthless as you need to be and not an ounce more. The world calls women cold for having the same boundaries men are praised for maintaining. The world calls women a lot of things. I stopped listening to most of it. Elena stood, extending her hand for a professional handshake. Thank you for the interview, Ms. Pack. I look forward to reading the piece. After Sarah left, Elena stood alone in her office, looking out over the city that had witnessed her transformation. Her phone buzzed with a message from David Wu. Board meeting confirmed for next week. The expansion into South American markets is approved. Congratulations, Elena. You're unstoppable. Unstoppable. It was a word people used about her frequently now, usually with some mixture of admiration and unease. The woman who'd built a billion-dollar company from nothing. The entrepreneur who'd refused to save her dying father's legacy. The daughter who'd walked away from millions and never looked back. People didn't know what to do with someone who refused to fit into neat narratives about family obligation and forgiveness. Elena didn't particularly care what people did with her story. She'd stopped living for other people's approval the night the Hales threw her out. Her assistant buzzed again. "Miss Chen, there's someone here without an appointment. She says she's a former Hale family employee and she has information you might want to hear." Elena's instinct was to refuse. She was done with anything Hale-related, but curiosity won out. "Send her in." The woman who entered was perhaps 50, plainly dressed, with the worn hands of someone who'd worked hard for decades. Elena recognized her after a moment, Mrs. Lin, who'd been the Hale family's head housekeeper for over 20 years. "Miss Chen, thank you for seeing me. I won't take much of your time." Mrs. Lin twisted her purse strap nervously. "I came because I need to tell you something I should have said years ago. I knew what Miss Mira was doing to you. I saw her setting you up, manipulating situations, planting evidence, and I said nothing because I was afraid of losing my job." Elena gestured for her to sit. "I appreciate you coming, but I'm not sure what you expect me to do with this information. The past is settled." "I don't expect anything. I just needed you to know that someone saw the truth, even if I was too cowardly to speak it." Mrs. Lin's eyes filled with tears. "You were kind to me. Always polite. Always treating me like a person instead of furniture the way the others did. And I repaid that kindness by staying silent while you were destroyed. I've carried that guilt for 3 years. Your guilt isn't my responsibility to absolve," Elena said gently but firmly. "You made the choice you thought you needed to make to survive. I understand that better than most. Still, I want you to have this." Mrs. Lin pulled an envelope from her purse, setting it on Elena's desk. "I kept copies of things I found when cleaning Miss Mira's room, evidence she'd missed when covering her tracks. I don't know if it's useful to you now, but it's yours if you want it." Elena opened the envelope, finding photographs, printouts of deleted emails, handwritten notes in Mira's distinctive script. All of it detailed plans to frame Elena, to manipulate the family, to secure her position by destroying the competition. It was more comprehensive than anything Elena's investigators had found. It was also completely unnecessary at this point. Mrs. Lin, Mira is already in prison. The Hale family is already destroyed. This evidence doesn't change anything. "I know, but maybe it gives you some comfort to know that the truth existed all along, even when no one would listen to it." Mrs. Lin stood. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and that I think what you've built is extraordinary. You deserved so much better than what that family gave you." After she left, Elena sat with the envelope of evidence, 3 years too late and completely redundant. She thought about burning it, then decided to file it away instead. Not because she needed it, but because it was a reminder that truth had always existed, even when buried. The rest of the day passed in the normal rhythm of business: calls with partners in Germany, negotiations with a manufacturer in Vietnam, strategic planning sessions with her executive team, the work that had saved her, given her purpose, and ultimately built an empire. That evening, Elena did something she rarely allowed herself. She drove to the old neighborhood where she'd grown up in the countryside, before the DNA test and the mansion and the family that had never wanted her. The village had changed in the years since she'd left, modernizing with the influx of manufacturing money that Elena's business connections had helped bring. The workshop where she'd worked as a teenager had expanded into a proper factory. The dirt roads had been paved, but the essence of the place remained: hardworking people making the best of limited resources, supporting each other in ways that rich families often never understood. She stopped at the small cemetery on the hill, walking to a modest grave marker. Her adoptive grandmother, the woman who'd raised her with nothing but love and patience, had been buried here 6 months before Elena was discovered by the Hales. Elena knelt by the grave, brushing away leaves that had accumulated on the stone. "I wish you could see what I built, grandmother," she said quietly. "I wish you could know that everything you taught me about resilience and self-reliance, and never depending on anyone who doesn't depend on you, it all mattered. You gave me the tools to survive when the rich family threw me away." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of fields and industry mixed together. They thought I was nothing because I came from here. They thought poverty made me less valuable, less worthy of love. But you taught me that worth doesn't come from money or status. It comes from character, from how you treat people when you have nothing to gain from kindness. Elena touched the cold stone gently. I became successful, but I hope I didn't become cruel. I hope I'm still someone you'd be proud of. She stayed there for an hour, surrounded by memories of a childhood that had been poor but genuine, comparing it to the 2 years in a mansion that had been wealthy but hollow. When she finally stood to leave, she felt something settle in her chest, a piece she hadn't realized she'd been missing. The Hales had given her DNA and rejection. This village, this simple cemetery, this memory of a grandmother who'd loved her without conditions, this was her real inheritance. 6 months later, Chen Global Solutions announced a new initiative, a foundation dedicated to supporting rural entrepreneurs and small manufacturers, providing them with access to international markets, business education, and startup capital. The foundation would be funded by 5% of the company's annual profits in perpetuity. When journalists asked Elena why she was giving away millions, she smiled and said simply, "Because I remember what it's like to have potential but no opportunity. I'm just opening doors for others the way I wish someone had opened them for me." The foundation's first headquarters would be located in the countryside village where Elena had grown up, bringing jobs and investment to the community that had given her the strength to survive everything that came after. It was the kind of legacy the Hales had never built, despite their wealth and prominence. They'd focused on accumulation and status. Elena focused on circulation and impact. On the 1-year anniversary of the foundation's launch, Elena received an unexpected letter. It was from Victoria Hale, forwarded through multiple channels to reach her. The letter was short, handwritten in shaky script that suggested either age or emotion. "Elena, I see what you're building. I see the person you've become. And I finally understand what we lost when we chose Mira over you. Not just a daughter, but someone who could have made our family meaningful instead of merely wealthy. I don't ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I see you now, even though it's too late. You were right about everything. I'm sorry we couldn't see it sooner. I'm sorry we couldn't see you. I hope you find happiness in the extraordinary life you've built. You deserved a family who celebrated you instead of crushing you. I'm sorry we weren't that family." Victoria. Elena read the letter twice, feeling nothing but a distant sympathy for the woman who'd finally understood what she'd thrown away. She considered responding, then decided against it. What would she say? The apology didn't change the past. It didn't heal wounds that had long since scarred over. She filed the letter away with Mrs. Lin's evidence, artifacts of a history that had shaped her but no longer defined her. Years continued to pass. Chen Global Solutions grew into an international powerhouse, expanding beyond sustainable packaging into renewable energy distribution, ethical manufacturing consulting, and impact investing. Elena's personal wealth climbed into the billions, but she maintained the same focused lifestyle she'd adopted in the storage unit: work as purpose, simplicity as choice, relationships based on mutual respect rather than need. She never married, though she had relationships with people who respected her boundaries and understood that she'd built a life that didn't require rescuing or completing. She never had children, choosing instead to mentor dozens of young entrepreneurs through her foundation, giving them the guidance she'd never received. The Hale name faded from prominence entirely. Mira was released from prison after serving 4 years and disappeared from public life entirely, reportedly living in a small town under a different name. Victoria lived another decade before dying quietly in a modest apartment, alone except for a nurse paid for by a distant cousin. None of the extended Hale family ever achieved significant success again. Without the company to prop them up, they scattered into ordinary lives, their brief moment of prominence over. Elena attended none of their funerals, sent no condolences, maintained the boundaries she'd established years before. When journalists occasionally asked about her relationship with her biological family, Elena gave the same answer she'd given for years. "I don't have a biological family. I have people who share my DNA, but family requires more than genetics. It requires mutual love, respect, and support." I never received those things from the Hales, so they were never my family. They were just people I briefly lived with before finding my own path. By the time Elena turned 30, she'd accomplished more than most people achieved in a lifetime. Her company was valued at over $8 billion. Her foundation had helped launch over 2,000 small businesses in rural communities across 6 countries. She'd been named one of the most influential business leaders of her generation, featured in case studies at universities, held up as an example of ethical capitalism and social responsibility. And through it all, she remained the woman who'd learned to survive in a storage unit with nothing but determination and a refusal to accept defeat. The girl the Hales had thrown away had become a force of nature, powerful, untouchable, and utterly indifferent to the people who'd once held all the power over her life. She stood in her corner office one evening, now 30 years old, looking out over the city that had witnessed her entire transformation. From desperate teenager to homeless young woman to struggling entrepreneur to billionaire businesswoman who'd changed entire industries. Her assistant knocked on the door. "Miss Chen, your car is here for the gala. Are you ready?" Elena turned from the window, smoothing down her gown, elegant, expensive, but not ostentatious. The uniform of someone who had nothing left to prove. "I'm ready." The gala was another business event, another opportunity to network and make deals and advance her company's interests. She'd attend, she'd smile, she'd be charming and strategic and effective. And then she'd come back to her office and keep building, because the work was never really finished. There were always more entrepreneurs to help, more markets to open, more impact to create. The Hales had tried to teach her that she was worthless, disposable, less valuable than the imposter they'd raised. Instead, they'd taught her that the only person she could truly rely on was herself. That family was a choice, not an obligation. That success without integrity was just expensive failure. They'd tried to destroy her, and in doing so, they'd forged her into something far stronger than they'd ever been. As Elena walked out of her office toward whatever came next, she carried with her the truth that had sustained her through the darkest moments. The people who reject you are revealing their limitations, not yours. The people who throw you away are simply making room for you to build something they could never imagine. And the best revenge isn't destruction or forgiveness, it's living so well, building so successfully, and rising so high that the people who tried to bury you become irrelevant footnotes in a story about resilience, determination, and the unstoppable force of someone who refuses to stay discarded. Elena Chen had become that force, and she never, ever looked back at the family that had tried so hard to keep her down. The girl they'd thrown away had become the woman who owned the world, and that was the only ending that mattered.